start with this session today. We have, first of all, Professor Cesare Santos, if you want. Thank you. I have to make the elogium of Professor Santos. Professor Santos teaches early modern history at the University of Trieste. His research interests focus on the missionary expansion of Catholicism between the 16th and 18th centuries, the inquisitorial control of religious minorities, and especially the relations between the Church of Rome and the Christian East. He published a very famous book in 2019, Trasgressioni necessarie, a title very exciting, where he examines the confessional dynamics within the Greek and Armenian communities of the Ottoman Empire and their response to the Catholic apostolate. He also the author of a volume on cultural encounters between Muslim slaves and Catholic citizens in 17th century Tuscany, Il Turco a Livorno. And more recently, he has worked on the role of the Inquisition in Asian missionary controversies, and he is currently writing a book on the Eastern Christian presence in early modern Rome. So, Professor Santos, thank you for being here. Will give us a paper with the title How Not to Be a Counter-Reformation Bishop, Eastern Catholic Prelates in Early Modern Rome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So we start. Early modern global Catholicism, currently the focus of intense scholarly interest, is not just a fashionable and questionable historiographical label, but also a tangible historical reality. To recognize this, it is not necessary to look at American or Asian societies, but simply to turn one's attention to the place most associated with the traditional, and we may say Eurocentric, study of the Counter-Reformation, that is, Rome. And by Rome, I do not mean just the Papal Curia, which has always been an international organization, albeit dominated by Italians, but the city itself. A city that attracted pilgrims and visitors from all over the world, including many religious and ecclesiastical figures who stayed for varying lengths of time, seeking material or spiritual benefits and becoming part of the local social, economic, and cultural landscape. A glance through the archives of the institutions responsible for welcoming and supervising these foreign ecclesiastics reveals the significant and persistent presence of the Eastern Catholic clergy. That is, monks, priests, and prelates from Eastern Orthodox communities that entered communion with the Church of Rome, often unilaterally and traumatically, between the 16th and the 18th centuries. Their presence posed a series of practical challenges and theoretical difficulties that illustrate very well the characteristics and contradictions of a church striving to be at once Roman and universal, global and Tridentine. This issue is closely linked to a long-standing question in the study of early modern Catholicism, namely, to adapt the title of a well-known essay by Peter Burke, how to be a Counter-Reformation bishop. Through the daily operations of the Roman congregations and the politics of canonization, the Curia worked to enforce models of episcopal behavior aligned with the Tridentine ideals of pastoral care, confessional discipline, and moral reform. Suffice to think of figures such as Carlo Borromeo or Gregorio Barbarigo. But was it possible to apply this model originally developed for the Latin Church also to prelates and faithful who came from different traditions? Despite several studies on the Catholic Reformation's impact on the Eastern churches, and despite the early beatification in 1643 of an Eastern Catholic archbishop, the Ruthenian Archparch of Polotsk, Josafat Kuncevich, This question remains largely unexplored. In an effort to address it within the specific context outlined above, in my talk I will adopt a biographical approach, reconstructing the parallel lives of two Armenian Catholic bishops who arrived in Rome in the first half of the 18th century. They are not famous individuals, remembered in the history of their own church, nor are their life paths to be considered as exceptional. However, in their diversity, they exemplify the success or the failure of the attempt to enforce what we may call an Oriental paradigm of the Counter-Reformation bishop against a much more complex reality. So the first case I want to examine is that of Jacob, Archbishop of the city of Marash, now Kahramanmaraş, in present-day southern Turkey. His arrival in Rome must be placed at the end of 1695, when he accompanied Grigor of Adana, the former Armenian Patriarch of Cilicia and the leading figure of the pro-Roman party among the Armenians of Syria, on a visit to the Holy See in Rome. And despite the two men's immediate profession of Catholic faith before the Holy Office on the 3rd of January 1696, the Roman Curia did not give the Patriarch and the Bishop the warmest of welcomes. In fact, Gregory's arrival was shadowed by several accusations of misconduct and deviations from the Catholic faith, prompting the Inquisition to open a formal trial against him. The investigation ultimately came to nothing, but the Congregation of Propaganda promptly urged the two prelates to return to their country. And reacting to this, in 1696, Jacob submitted a petition explaining that a return to his homeland was impossible because of the persecution of Catholics there. Instead, he requested admission to the Urban College of Propaganda Fide, citing both his lack of learning and his very young age of 23. The request, which was contrary to the rules, though not entirely without precedent, a quarter of a century earlier, another Eastern bishop had attempted to do the same, the request was rejected. And a year later, Grigor and Jacob were finally compelled to leave the city. So Jacob's first encounter with Rome, with the city of the popes, and with the Roman Curia itself ended in failure. And it must be noted that it was marred from the outset by a lie. In his bid to be accepted as a student, the bishop had significantly reduced his age, since in his profession of faith before the Holy Office, he had declared himself to be 30, not 23. The bishop's second visit to Rome in the autumn of 1699 was prepared with greater care. In the preceding year, Jacob had made a point of sending the Congregation of Propaganda directly or through intermediaries a series of letters attesting both to his efforts in favor of Catholicism in the Diocese of Marash, and above all to the reprisals that these had provoked against him. So, according to his account, his own faithful had bound his hands behind his back and dragged him before the Ottoman Pasha, declaring, "This man," I quote, "this man is a Latin, and he wants to make us Latins. He corrupts our faith and seeks to turn us into papists and enemies of the Turks. We do not want this. Kill this man to free us from him. If you do not kill him, we will accuse you before the Sultan," end quote. So, flogged, imprisoned for 3 months before being expelled from his own city, the bishop took refuge successively in Adana, Tarsus, and Cyprus, from where the Franciscans of the Holy Land secured him a passage to Lebanon, and from there he wrote to Propaganda Fide requesting assistance. And thanks to the recommendations of various Catholic prelates and missionaries, he obtained to be welcomed in Rome. He was first housed at the hospital of Santo Spirito in Sassia to recover from illness, and then placed at the hospice for Armenian pilgrims near their national Armenian church of Santa Maria Giziaca in Rome. However, the trust placed in him soon proved to be misplaced. Like other Eastern clergymen, after a few months, the bishop left Rome without permission, probably with the hope of begging for alms around Europe. As there was also suspicion that his Catholic faith was less firm than previously believed. When fleeing Rome, he had said that he wanted to join the Lutheran sect. the Holy Office activated its network of spies and correspondents, managing to have him arrested in Vienna in 1700. Forcibly brought back to Rome, the bishop was placed under observation, first at the ecclesiastical hospice near Ponte Sisto, and then again in Santa Maria Egiziaca, while the Inquisition continued its investigation. And finally, perhaps also considering the danger, the risk of escape, on the 17th of March 1703, Jacob was imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo, where he would remain for the next 13 years. So, during this long period of detention, the prelate repeatedly asked to be released, refuting the accusations against him as a slander, asking at least for an improvement in his living conditions. And the Curia agreed to occasional donations of money, of episcopal vestments, but always refused to let him go. It had good reasons to do so, as Jacob continued to cause problems even from behind bars. In June 1707, the guardian of the Holy Land informed the Congregation of Propaganda that he had intercepted 2 letters coming from Rome addressed to the Armenian Patriarch of Jerusalem, in which Jacob, the bishop, asked, I quote, that the fathers of the Holy Land be harmed and mistreated in order to obtain his freedom through them, end quote. The letters, which also appear to have contained outrageous judgments against the Pope and the Curia, were sent back to Rome, provoking a further crackdown on the Armenian prelate. So only almost 10 years later, in 1716, was Jacob able to leave the castle, but not the city. Any request to this effect was rejected for fear that once away from Rome, the prelate would start causing trouble again. So the bishop became an unwelcome guest of the Roman Curia, weighing on its budget for his upkeep, living on the money of propaganda. Like many other members of the Eastern Catholic clergy, residing in the city for different reasons, he was assigned to a subsidy of about 8 scudi a month, the so-called parte di palazzo. Anyway, the Bishop of Marash supplemented this income for his living with the so-called mass stipends or alms, so the money received when celebrating the Mass. And in this case, too, his activities ended up creating problems. Although as early as 1716, he had obtained the permission, the official permission from the Holy Office to celebrate private masses, a term that in Tridentine era did not mean the absence of faithful, complaints soon arose that the bishop was altering the liturgy to suit his own taste, omitting so certain prayers, for example, for the sake of brevity. Accused once again, this time before the tribunal of the Cardinal Vicar, so responsible for the ecclesiastical discipline in the Diocese of Rome, Jacob defended himself by claiming that he had merely followed the example of another prelate. And in any case, he argued, he had committed no fault since, I quote, in Rome, low masses are allowed, and they are celebrated either in a long or short manner. So, when he says it short, he's not wrong. The distinction typical of the Latin liturgy between low masses and high masses could also be applied to the Armenian liturgy was far from obvious. In 1725, for example, the Maronite scholar Giuseppe Assemani, considered an authority on Eastern rites, believed that it could not. He claimed, for example, that Eastern priests in Rome celebrated in a very improper manner, entirely on a whim, using Latin vestments, celebrating without the presence of deacons and altar servers, omitting prayers, etc. These concerns all led to the publication of some avvertimenti, warnings, in which the Cardinal Vicar instructed all sacristans of Roman churches to forbid celebrations by Eastern clergy, Eastern Catholic clergy, who lacked the proper license, vestments, or the Eucharist host, and to restrict them instead to either to the national churches of the communities or to remote chapels, so as not to attract the curiosity and the scandal, the ridicule of the Latin Roman faithful. This decree, issued on the 6th of December 1725, was immediately protested by the numerous Armenian clergy in Rome, who argued not only that their vestments and hosts had long been identical to the Latin ones, but also that a form of low mass had been practiced among Armenian Catholics for almost 80 years, and that in Rome, Latin faithful had long attended it with devotion and without scandal, as even the sacristan of the Church of the Holy Trinity of Pilgrims, Santissima Trinità dei Pellegrini, testified. Although this church was not among those authorized, more than 10 years later, the Bishop of Marash continued to celebrate Mass there. And in 1736, 40 years after his first arrival in Rome, Jacob was once again reported to the Holy Office, this time with the additional accusation of hearing the confessions of Latin faithful in violation of the rules which prohibited ritual mixing. We do not know the exact date of the bishop's death. His name simply disappears from the archival documents after 1739, when he is still mentioned in a list of Eastern prelates living in Rome at the expense of the Curia. In his case, the documentary oblivion must have coincided with the impossibility of causing further further problems due to his advanced age. In virtually every aspect of his episcopal activity, Jacob had in fact distinguished himself in a negative way. Manifest ignorance, indiscipline, inability, real or presumed, to carry out his pastoral duties, suspected heresy, liturgical negligence, and so on. Yet, I wonder, which of these traits were genuinely his own, and which arose from the structural difficulties of being a bishop, compelled to live far from his own diocese in a social and cultural context so different from that of his own education? To explore this question is useful, I think, to compare his story with that of another Armenian prelate whom he likely met several times in the same place, in the Rome of the early 18th century. So, Sukias Casavet, Archbishop of Aleppo, originally arrived in the city of the popes in Rome later than Jacob. But unlike him, much is known about his earlier life. He was born in Constantinople into an ancient Armenian Catholic family, and in 1706, at the height of the sectarian and confessional clashes that shook the Armenian community of Istanbul, he left the capital for the island of Crete, accompanying a high-ranking Ottoman official and serving there as head of the goldsmith of Candia, a profession likely familiar to him since his father was a silversmith. At the same time, however, he began at the time to pursue an ecclesiastical career, receiving minor orders, the subdiaconate, and the diaconate. Finally, on the 14th of February 1717, he was ordained a priest by an Armenian bishop passing through the island. This posed a potential problem for a Catholic. A Catholic could not ordinarily receive holy orders from a member of the apostolic Armenian hierarchy, which was not in communion with Rome. But Sukias later defended himself by asserting that the bishop who ordained him was of Catholic sentiment, as he said. Not long afterwards, still following this Pasha, who was a friend of him, he moved to Cairo, where he worked there on behalf of Catholic converts, not just Armenians, but for example, but also Copts, earning certificates of merit from the local Jesuits and Franciscans, who asked the Congregation of Propaganda to grant him the official status of apostolic missionary. In February 1721, the Pasha was appointed governor of Aleppo, and as always, wanted Sukias at his side, this time as head of the fiscal administration of the province. From this position, a relevant position, Sukias continued to promote the spread of Catholicism among the Armenians of Aleppo, where a large community had formed under another bishop, Abraham Arzivian, who will become later the first patriarch of the Armenian Catholic Church. However, since they were called the schismatics, had Arzivian arrested and exiled on the island of Arvad, Sukias agreed to be consecrated bishop himself in order to prevent the Church of Aleppo from falling once again under the control of a non-Catholic prelate. And to do so, he had to circumvent the rules once again, approaching the Armenian Patriarch of Cilicia, unrecognized by Rome, so a schismatic patriarch, and persuading him in what was described as a simoniacal manner, so paying, to ordain him as assistant archbishop of the patriarchal see. Propaganda hoped, obviously, that the Armenian Catholics of Aleppo would have enjoyed the same protection as Sukias, thanks to his official position in the Ottoman bureaucracy. As I said, he was the treasurer of the province. But this hope, in fact, soon proved futile. In early 1722, the Pasha was deposed and Sukias was imprisoned, managing to secure his release only by paying a substantial sum of money. While the Roman Curia was still trying to assess the situation, news arrived on the 14th of August that Sukias had landed in Livorno and was heading to Rome to seek refuge from persecution. As soon as he arrived in Rome, the bishop had, so to speak, to put himself in order. He therefore appeared before the Holy Office to request dispensation from all the canonical irregularities that he had incurred by receiving holy orders from heretical prelates, as well as for any simony associated with the gifts, he said, that he had given to those who had ordained him. On the 19th of October, the cardinal inquisitors admitted him to the profession of Catholic faith, that you see on the screen, as a simple priest, while the Holy Office sought more detailed information from Propaganda regarding his case. Finally, during the papal audience of 4th of November 1722, the Pope granted him dispensation from the irregularity and authorized him to exercise the episcopal order. He was recognized as a bishop. The Congregation of Propaganda assigned him a temporary accommodation in Santa Maria Giziaca, in the National Hospice for the Armenians in Rome, hoping that, at the beginning at least, once the persecution had ended in Syria, he would be able to return to his homeland and to carry out his pastoral duties as a bishop there. But soon it became clear that this was not possible. So Sukias had to adjust to live in Rome, even demonstrating a pastoral zeal that proved somewhat ill-advised. He began hearing immediately the confessions of the Armenian guests and visitors to the Church of Santa Maria Giziaca without first obtaining the proper authorization from the rector of the church, from the official confession of the nation, Don Stefano di Cacciadur, Stepanos Baberzi, thereby provoking, obviously, their jealous hostility. And to diffuse the conflict, the Congregation of Propaganda decided to assign him another prestigious role. So he became the Armenian language lecturer at the Urban College, the Collegio Urbano, a position to which Sukias devoted himself for nearly 20 years, from 1724 onwards. In that same year, however, the bishop also found another opportunity to exercise his pastoral skills. The proclamation of the Jubilee for the holy year 1725 led to a sudden increase in the number of Eastern pilgrims to the Eternal City, particularly Armenians. According to the data on Catholic professions, of faith made before the Inquisition, mandatory for those seeking accommodation in the nation's hospice, Armenian visitors rose from an average of 35 per year between 1715 and 1722 to as many as 171 in the holy year 1725. Don Stefano di Cacciadur accompanied the pilgrims to the palace of the Holy Office and also acted as interpreter, but his efforts soon proved insufficient, as not all Armenian visitors stayed at Santa Maria Giziaca, and some criticized the priest for his lack of doctrinal preparation. So in December 1724, given the need for a more learned and skilled person, Propaganda granted Sukias the faculty to hear the confessions of pilgrims, and to avoid conflict with Don Stefano, and to take advantage of the bishop's extensive linguistic knowledge, Sukias obtained eventually a position in St. Peter's Basilica, where he would hear confessions not only from members of his own nation, but also, for example, from Turks who had converted to Christianity. The task was carried out satisfactorily, as even after the end of the Jubilee, in May 1726, the Eastern faithful petitioned the Apostolic Penitentiary to grant the bishop a permanent confessional in St. Peter's. Meanwhile, the bishop's abilities had also been rewarded with a promotion, so he was appointed as the supervisor of Santa Maria Giziaca after the departure of Don Stefano di Cacciadur. But cohabitation with the other Armenian clergy and residents of Rome proved difficult. And by the end of the decade, in 1739, Sukias abandoned the leadership of the Armenian Church of Rome, moved into an apartment made available to him by another Eastern Christian community, the Ruthenian community, and also because of his advanced age, he gave up teaching of the urban college for good in 1743. On the 1st of June of that year, he died at his home. A funeral befitting his episcopal rank was promptly organized at the college church, attended by the rector, the students, and several Eastern Christian prelates, among them the Armenian Catholic Patriarch Abraham Arzivian, who had arrived in the Eternal City only a few months earlier to receive the pallium from the Pope. Sukias, who might have stood in his place, so as patriarch, had he not fled Syria 20 years before, was the subject of a public eulogy. But what is most interesting to us, however, is the inventory of the possessions he left in his flat, drawn up on the 11th of June, 1743. Because this detailed list not only sheds light on the material culture of a man straddling two worlds, so Levantine-style clothing, porcelain coffee cups, Western and Eastern devotional images, but also offers insight into the theological training of an Eastern Catholic prelate of the 18th century. It lists nearly 100 volumes, manuscripts, and printed works in both Armenian and Latin. And although it is not always easy to identify the books, described, as you can imagine, in a rather approximate manner, even a quick glance reveals liturgical texts, dictionaries, and grammars, and above all, works of catechetical, pastoral, and controversial character, written by Armenian and European missionaries and published by the propaganda press. As for the manuscripts, after various vicissitudes, many of them eventually found their way into the Vatican Library. So we may say that taken together, this inventory not only confirms the bishop's cultural standing and erudition, but also positions him as an important figure in the creation of an Armenian Catholic intellectual heritage. So the two biographical profiles outlined above are neither exceptional nor unique. Rather, they mark the opposite poles, we may say, of a spectrum more common than one might think. On the one hand, the archives of Propaganda Fide and the Holy Office preserves many accounts of Eastern prelates, especially Armenians, whose morality and orthodoxy were doubtful at least. These men arrived in Rome under murky circumstances and were subjected to close surveillance by the Catholic authorities, who did not hesitate to imprison them. One might, for example, recall the false bishop Hovhannes Baltagiolu or the genuine bishop Haristakis, both arrested a few decades before Jacob of Marash on suspicion of being impostors. More generally, the Curia often preferred to forcibly keep such figures in Rome, fearing that their return to home would cause greater harm than good. On the other hand, early 18th century Rome also abounded with the well-educated and zealous Eastern bishops. The Congregation of Propaganda periodically sought to persuade them to return to their dioceses, though almost always in vain, given the dangers that they would face either to their body, persecution, or to their soul, since exercising their ministry in non-Catholic lands meant exposing themselves to the now forbidden practice of communicatio sacris, that is, interconfessional relations. Sukias was only one among many, and not even the most prominent. For example, he never became an ordaining bishop for Armenian Catholic, like his contemporary Vartanes de Stefani. This paradoxical situation of the Roman Curia, forced to pay the salaries of unsavory individuals without at the same time being able to truly exploit the pastoral talents of the most capable subjects, was further exacerbated by the uncertainty and ambiguity that marked almost the entire Eastern Catholic clergy in the Ottoman Empire. From this perspective, as we shall see, the stark contrast that I have outlined between the negative model of the Bishop of Marash and the positive model of the Archbishop of Aleppo needs to be nuanced. In fact, if we step away for a moment from the institutional sources that we are discussing in this conference, so those preserved in the archives of the Roman congregations, we discover that even the seemingly immaculate figure of Sukias carried a serious flaw in his origin. His priestly ordination in Crete had in fact been conferred by what later turned out to be a pseudo-bishop, so a false bishop, as Patriarch Arzevian himself realized with horror during a review of the legitimacy of the Eastern clergy residing in Rome, entrusted to him by the Pope in early 1743. So, despite Sukias' protest, the invalidity of his ordination led to his immediate suspension from all activities and liturgical functions, while the Curia hastened to find a solution to remedy this situation. And to avoid the enormous scandal that might otherwise have ensued, everything was handled with the utmost discretion. After securing the consent of the Apostolic Penitentiary and the dispensation of Pope Benedict XIV, the elderly prelate was quietly and secretly reordained in the Maronite, not Armenian Church of Rome only a few months before his death. Nothing about that is in the Archive of Propaganda or the Holy Office. This unexpected turn of events highlights the challenges faced by the Holy See in the arduous task of establishing the Eastern Catholic Churches. In its attempt to discipline the Eastern clergy as rigorously as the Western clergy had been or was being regulated, the Roman Curia established a powerful bureaucratic apparatus, of which we have encountered several actors, from the congregations of cardinals, Propaganda Fide and the Holy Office, but also the congregation of the Council, up to judicial bodies such as the Apostolic Penitentiary or the Tribunal of the Cardinal Vicar. Yet, the clandestine and irregular situation of Catholics in the Ottoman Empire, forced into daily necessary transgressions of Roman directives and characterized by geographical dispersion, linguistic plurality that made continuous monitoring nearly impossible, often combined also with a different cultural conception of episcopal ministry, especially from the point of view of obedience to hierarchical, to hierarchy, the quorum, or even the relationship with money. All of this made it exceedingly difficult for a long time to establish Eastern hierarchies fully aligned with the Curia's wishes, and proved even more problematic later on when the Tridentine model eventually evolved in the ultramontane one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Professor Santos for the suggesting paper, so rich of points and ideas. I don't want to discuss it now, but we will have more time then. But it's very important. In the many points you remarked that the big problem of the uniformation of liturgy. Well known, it's a big challenge between the many challenges of the time. Now we have the second paper by Elisabeth Richard. Elisabeth Richard is a PhD student in religious sciences, with a jointly supervision by the École pratique des hautes études in Paris and the University Orientale di Napoli. And she's preparing her PhD thesis on Theatine missionaries in Georgia in the 17th century. And her paper is about Rome and Georgia in the 17th century through the specter of the Theatine missionaries. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for letting me present my research today. We will focus on the relations between Rome and Georgia through the specter of the Theatine mission, one of the very first missions established by Propaganda Fide in 1626, and the first modern mission in Georgia. This mission officially terminated in 1692, but actually it continued until 1714, when the Theatin missionary field in Georgia came under the jurisdiction of Missions Étrangères of Paris. So 12 years ago was registered among the memory of the world the description of Georgian kingdom and geographical atlas elaborated by Prince Vashtuki Bagdationi in 1745. So this is considered in Georgia as the first description of Georgian historiographical territory, but it's well written that it's the first Georgian description. As a matter of fact, if the work of Prince Bagdationi allows Europeans to become familiar with the geography of the Caucasus, it complements the first works as published in the 17th century, which allows them to discover Georgia in Europe. And these works, the first dictionary, first grammar, first dictionary published in 1629, first grammar in 1643, numerous description of the country, published independently or in volumes of travel accounts. We owe them all to the Theatin missionaries, and most of them to the Propaganda Fide typography. But it's not so much on the cultural aspect of the relation between Rome and Georgia that we will hold our attention today, as the relations between this ancient Christianity and the papacy is more on the liturgical side. The Georgian Orthodox Church desire for independence was affirmed is also still today affirmed as sure, but it has taken various forms over time. Georgia was converted to Christianity very early, but the defense of its autonomy within the ecclesiastical hierarchy is no less ancient. Some Georgian historians say that Georgia stayed within the Roman hierarchy for more or less 2 centuries. Alongside the political alliance between Georgia and the Holy See, one of the great goals of this mission is, of course, the question of union with the Georgian Orthodox. What does those missionary sources at ground level, and moreover the sources from Propaganda Fide, tell us about the Georgian Christianity of this time as we see it in Rome? This is the question we will try to answer today through the example of a single sacrament, the one that occupied the Theatin through the duration of their mission, the first and the most important of all, the baptism. But first, allow me a quick overview of the situation that led to the sending of the Neapolitan Theatin in Georgia. I must specify that if for the sake of simplicity we will speak about Georgia, there is no united Georgia at the time that interests us. Since the death of George VIII in 1466, the country is divided in 3 kingdoms in red and 5 principalities in green. In the 17th century, the country is also in continuous conflict internally and with his neighbors who are trying to gain grounds. It is partially occupied, especially in the east, where Tbilisi is governed by viceroy appointed by the Persian Shah. But the main specificity of the 17th century Georgia is to be a Christian stronghold in a predominantly Muslim geographical era. It's taken in between Ottoman Empire and Persia and try to stay really Christian. It has been an officially Christian nation since the year 335, but the region is marked by very not marked by very great piety, according to the unanimous opinion of missionaries and travelers of the time. As one of the missionary outlined, reads, I quote, "Rits remain, but Georgians have no religious culture." So it's in such a nation that the first Theatin father arrived in 1627. First of all, they never baptize anyone who has not reached the age of 3 or 4 years, at which time the father and mother of the child prepare a most solemn banquet to which they invite a great number of friends and relatives. Once the people have gathered, before sitting down to the table, they take the child to the cellar, where the service is to be held, accompanied by the godfather and all the people. Here begins the description of Mangrelian baptism in Relazione della Colchide, written by a Theatin missionary, Arcangelo Lamberti, published in 1654 in Italian, and diffused all across Europe in the following years, especially thanks to the French translation and publication by Melchizedek Thévenot between 1663 and 1672. So on the 4th of May, 1626, was established by Rome this new Catholic mission of Georgia, mission entrusted to the Theatin. This is the presentation of the picture of the first missionary in the middle of with the Pope and the cardinals. We have this mission we have the great joy to have 7 volumes of pictures, because one of the missionary was a picturer, Theatin from Palermo, and so we have all this our own illustration of the mission. So these Theatins were founded in Naples and established in 1524, so shortly before the Council of Trent, and they took active part to this council, especially on the matter of the training of clerics. It's one of the specificity of this order. They are also very attached, as we know, to the canon laws, to the respect of the Roman rites, which explain their crucial role in the foundation of the Inquisition. In fact, as Andrea Vanni points out in his book, in the 16th century, Theatin are everywhere in the Roman administration. So the Georgian mission is the first of this religious order, and also the first, as I said, one of the first of the very young congregation of Propaganda Fide. It was established in the context of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, and also established to bring together the separated churches. But this Theatin, as we saw, the Georgia is huge, but they were in most part of the country, because they were to Kakheti, Kartli, Guri, Imereti, Mangreli, Aprazi, and a bit in Svaneti. So what they see in Georgia is quite global. It's not just one town. So their focus really very strictly to the sacramental life. It's not very common in the history of a mission, but because it's one of the first missions established by Propaganda Fide, we have a very well documented mission. We have, for most of the decision in the acta, we have the letter sent to the missionary, and we have, of course, the letters coming from the mission. So we can really reconstruct like the skeleton of the mission through the Propaganda Fide archives. So we can see in the first instruction given to the missionary in 1626 that one of the main purposes of the mission is to apprehend the Georgian faith. First of all, I quote, "In addition to the things contained in the general instruction given to all missionaries, the Saint Father must diligently observe the nature and inclination of the Georgian people, the errors they have in the dogmas of the faith, and the sins to which they are most commonly subjected." So the first aim of the mission is not necessarily conversion, but merely observation of the local faith, comparison of the dogma to those of the Roman faith, to see if the union is possible. Because we are really very much in this idea of union with Christian but not Catholic, and to be sure that the union can be done, we have to be sure of their baptism, of course. And so the first document we have concerning this question of the validity of Georgian baptism is from just 5 years into the mission. One of the initiators of the mission, its first prefect also, Father Pietro Avitabile, was received in audience by the Pope in March 1631, just coming back from 4 years in Georgia. On this occasion, he wrote a relation giving a presentation of the political and religious situation in Georgia, report of the mission to Georgia. And this document has been published a few years later in 1658 by a fellow Theatin, Father Clemente Galano, which is more known regarding the Armenian fact, but was in fact missionary in Georgia. This document contains a list of 33 errors of errores Georgianorum, you can see here. Among those, we have 5 articles related to the question of baptism, number 9 to 13. They are organized in order of importance, and so we will proceed the same way, finishing by the more important. So we begin with the 13. The 13 is quite not very important. Children, when they are baptized, are given the sacrament of confirmation and the Eucharisty. So these points, as we know, concern a practice which is not common in the Latin Church, except in case of danger of death, but raise no question. Number 12, they think that the minister of baptism is only the priest, even at the point of death, hence in the imminent danger of the death of the infant. If the priest is absent, no one baptizes him, in which case, many say, the baptism conferred on the infant by its mother is sufficient for the salvation of the infant. So here we are dealing with two questions, the question of the minister of baptism. It is said that for the Georgians, the only possible minister is a priest, while in the Latin Church, following the canon of Pope Eugene IV, in the beginning of 15th century, in case of danger of death, anyone can administrate a baptism to prevent children from dying without baptism. So for the Georgian, there is an heredity of baptism, but this question is considered even by the missionary as so absurd that it's not even considered by them to be as relevant to be given any answer. Number 11, they rebaptize those reconciled to the Christian faith from the error of apostasy. So that's the question of apostasy. In Georgia, we have documents regarding this question, and for them, apostasy is so so sinful, some even write like that it erases the baptism. So you have to rebaptize, as you have never been baptized. For this question of apostates is very crucial in Georgia, because Georgian in Georgia it's very common to sold your children to the Ottoman, to give them a proper education, and after they are baptized, and after they are sold, so there are potentially lots of apostates, and after they come back and they are rebaptized. So as we know, for the Latin, the baptism is sacrament of character, and so it's impossible to rebaptize just to If you are baptized correctly, you stay baptized. Number 10, they are not very anxious about receiving the sacrament of baptism, for they do not know that it's the door to the other sacrament. A few days before our arrival, it happened that a bishop, formerly one of the leaders, was discovered to have never been baptized, to whom they had conferred baptism, yet they did not confer order repeatedly. So they don't see the baptism as essential to receive the other order, but this question is not really relevant in Rome. They just see it as another problem, but they don't really discuss it in Propaganda Fide. Number 9, that's the most important. They confer the sacrament of baptism in this manner. First, the priest reads many prayers over the infant to be baptized. In the middle of them, he says the formula necessary for the baptism, just as it was one of the said prayers, pronounced in the Greek rite, and then, without washing the infant, he goes through reading. Then, the reading having been completed, the infant is stripped of his clothes, and at last, after a considerable time as elapses from the promulgation of the form, he is washed, not by the priest himself, but by an undertaker without any promulgation of the form. This is crucial because the ritual of baptism itself is called into question. In this particular description of the baptism, we find it many times in lots of letters and reports and even in printing books. Really, this ritual of baptism seems to be quite common in Georgia because the priest is considered to be so important that he's too important to be washing the child himself. So an undertaker do it. So this question arrived first in Rome in 1631, and we have no question this year. On the 14th of April, so here we have the missionary baptizing the Georgian children. On the 14th of April 1636, Cardinal Spada presents the Georgian situation to congregation and raised the question of the validity of baptism for the first time. It's related to a letter from Father Pietro Avitabile, written in Aleppo on the 24th of November 1635, in which he said that he is still waiting for the answer to his doubts against the validity of Georgian baptism. And from this date, 1635, we have the mention of dubia regarding the Georgian baptism, and this mention will last quite a few times because even after the end of our mission, we have some documents regarding this question. So it's the first question is written like that in Acta de Propaganda Fide, congregation of 14th of April, 1636. Father Avitabile proposed about the baptism of the Georgian, which he considered to be invalid from the doctrine of the theologians, since one washed himself and the other pronounced the form, and he insisted on the resolution of this point of doubt. So this question he considers so important that it's to be reported to a special congregation of the question of baptism, linked to the question of baptism in Japan. But during this congregation, it's sent to the Holy Office and with no direct answer. But we have a letter on the 14th of August the same year, advising the missionaries to be careful and that even if there are two ministers of the sacrament, the one pouring water or washing must always pronounce also the formula. second letter sent on the 22nd of November 1636 is announced to be a response to the dubia. But unfortunately, if we have the letter announcing the response, we don't have the response. But we know that this question was discussed even outside of Propaganda Fide, because we have a letter from Pietro della Valle, the Roman gentleman who traveled for years, went to India, and who is quite close to the Roman administration. And Propaganda Fide, although he is external because secular, even if sometimes he wants to assist he repeatedly asked to be allowed to assist to some congregation. He asked the question directly, is the Georgian baptism valid? For him, the question is even very personal, because he is married to a Georgian captive. He met in Persia, married in Athens, and so he is very eager to know if his wife is really baptized or not. We have different letters in which he begs the Propaganda Fide to answer the question. He said, please do me the favor of informing me if anything has been said in Rome about the doubt that arose in the part regarding the baptism of Georgians, and for which we have not received an answer. Once more, the answer is lacking, but after some months, he stops begging, so maybe he was satisfied. We have to note the prudence of the congregation in this matter. They encourage repeatedly the missionaries to train the Georgian priest to use the correct formula, but they never said they never write the baptism is not valid. In one of the letters, they said that maybe it's better to keep this way of doing things of two ministers, but to insist that they both pronounce the formula together. So we have no mention of the role of the Congregation of Holy Office in this question, because the dubia of Georgia were sent to Holy Office, but in the archives, the document has been marked as missing since 1852. And we have found no decision, just the one given by Propaganda Fide, in this injunction to have both ministers saying the formula. It resolved nothing, because at the very end of our mission in 1687, one of the last reports of Father Rasponi deplores the same practice, even while trying to form the priest. And he summarized us as, I quote, regarding baptism, also they use the correct formula, and matter, they don't connect the two. And it's really the issue. We find the answer to this question in a more clear way in Questiones Morales from Father Angelo Maria Vericelli, published in Venice in 1656. He was also a missionary in Georgia. Also, he never went further than Constantinople. His treatise is based on his experience in Constantinople, and also on the missionary experience of his country in Georgia and Mangarelia. So he answers this question of Georgian baptism with this quotation: the Holy Congregation has rightly decreed that they should be baptized again conditionally, because generally they are baptized correctly, either because they were baptized by Greek priests who baptized according to the correct rite, or because some Georgian priests can perform ablution according to the correct form, without there being that delay which excluded the connection between matter and form. Vericelli's work is fundamental on this question, because it's even quoted by the Holy Office in 1711 in response to a question of an Armenian regarding the validity of baptism of young Georgian. So to answer this question of the link, here are our Georgian priests. To answer this question of the links between Rome and Georgia through the mission of the Theatines, we have chosen to highlight the issue of the poor administration of the sacraments, and in particular, the invalidity of baptism, because it is a central question for the missionary of the 17th century, but also because it illustrates well, on one hand, the ignorance of this clergy and the work of formation which falls to the Theatines, but also, on the other hand, the impossibility of union with a nation if one does not recognize their baptism. Even the Greek at the time were very clear on this question that the Georgian baptism was not valid, because we have a Greek bishop, former monk of the Athos, established in Georgia, Alaverdeli, who said that the Georgians said about him that if in the question of faith they are not they don't agree, however, we have the same opinion on the invalidity of baptism. Beyond this question of validity or not of the baptism, which is finally a non-question because we have no clear condemnation, but it's clear that it's not valid, the union or not with the Georgian church, which is in fact at this time in Georgia more political than religious. What's interesting through this example is also to see the main instruction given to the Theatine by propaganda fide. We spoke about the observation of the local customs when, in the letter answering the dubium, Rome retells that it's important to observe the local customs and to give reports regarding those local customs. So this shows us that the most important for the Theatines, as strict agent of propaganda fide, is to rediscover this Oriental Christianity in the spirit of discovery of the world, specific to the 17th century, and their work is not to convert and to Christianize, but to Catholicism in the classical Greek sense of universality, according to the biblical formula taken up by the bylaws of propaganda fide, ut omnes unum sint. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Elisabeth Richard for this interesting lecture. I think that there are many points to discuss. So I am wondering the relationship between this problem of the local customs and at the same time the general uniformation of liturgy, or the problem of the validity of the sacraments. We have here Maria Teresa Fattori, who wrote a pivotal article about this problem of the sacraments. So now, unfortunately, we have to go ahead with the paper by Carlo Pelliccia. Only after we will have the coffee break. So you must resist for no more than 20-25 minutes. Are you escaping? So just a moment, that my laptop is not. Here I have the elogium of Dr. Carlo Pelliccia, who is currently research fellow to the Consiglio Nazionale delle Ricerche, Istituto di Linguistica Computazionale, and he also teaches at the Università degli Studi Internazionali in Rome. And Carlo will deliver a paper titled "The Chinese Experience of Cassio Blandolisi, 1683-1751, in the documents of the Archivio, sorry, I was reading in Spanish. I am I have a melange in my poor head. Archivio generale delle scuole pie.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Let's start. My paper, which presents and shares the initial investigations and preliminary research conducted at the Archivio Generale degli Scolopi in Rome, aims to analyze a missionary figure active in the Chinese context, who has not been extensively studied by contemporary historiography. The Order of the Pious Schools, founded in Rome in 1597 by the Spaniard José de Calasanz and canonically approved in 1621, fulfill its evangelizing mission through pedagogical action directed towards the younger generations. In that, its members are still engaged today in promoting education and Christian formation, combining faith and culture in order to renew the church and transform society according to gospel values, thereby fostering fraternity. This order is not called to direct evangelization of non-Christian peoples, and thus it's not missionaries in the strict sense. Nevertheless, it has experienced an extension of its educational service to the ends of the earth, without identifying this as a part of an original missionary vocation. Despite this canonical and bureaucratic premise, within the order one can identify several well-known missionary figures who experienced the mission either because they were appointed by the central government to establish or support educational institutions in European and non-European territories, or because they were selected by the Holy See to travel to distant regions to serve the Roman Curia and contribute to the dissemination of the Catholic doctrine. My paper aims to analyze the Chinese experience of Cassio Blandolisi and to present the documentation preserved in this archive, which records his mission in China. This material provides an opportunity to explore the context in which his missionary activity developed and to highlight the issues and tensions to arose between some religious orders, especially the Jesuits and the Congregation of Propaganda Fide, concerning the management and the organization of the missions. Cassio Blandolisi was born in Narni in 1683 into a noble family, and he joined the Order of the Piarists on 20 February 1698. After gaining educational experience in various colleges and schools of the order, he was selected by Pierluigi Carafa, secretary of the Congregation Propaganda Fide, to join the group of missionaries designated to accompany Carlo Ambrogio Mezzabarba, Patriarch of Alexandria and later Bishop of Lodi, on an apostolic visitation to China. In fact, it appears that Blandolisi himself had put forward his candidacy for the mission to China, and he was chosen to replace a Piarist who had declined the invitation for personal reasons. The official expedition and its definitive list was composed of three branches: ecclesiastics, missionaries assigned to the provinces, and virtuosi, that is, artists. It includes many members: secular priests, 2 Servites, 2 the Carmelites, 3 Barnabites, 1 Franciscan, 3 minor clerics, and 5 laymen, which demonstrated skills in the artistic and musical fields. The primary aim of this expedition was to ensure the notification and the scrupulous observance of the Apostolic Constitution et Illa Die, issued by Pope Clement XI in 1750. This document condemned the Chinese rites, required missionaries to swear an oath of obedience, mandated the renunciation of such rites, and annulled all previous concessions and allowances regarding this matter. Brandolisi was selected not only for his theological knowledge, but also for his aptitude in mathematics and chemistry. He departed for Lisbon in 1719, and the following year he set sail for China, arriving first in Macau and then in Beijing on October 1711. He was welcomed among the philosophers and mathematicians of the imperial court and succeeded in arousing the emperor's curiosity, engaging with him in discussion of mathematics. Indeed, the emperor wished for Brandolisi to remain in China. But however, as Brandolisi initially appeared reluctant to accept the emperor's proposal, partly due to the unfamiliar climate, the emperor eventually changed his mind and decided he no longer wanted him at court. Brandolisi left the capital city and definitely departing from China in January of the following year, in 1722. After a long journey, he returned into Rome, where he was received by Pope Innocent XIII and by Giuseppe Sacripante, prefect of Propaganda Fide, who commissioned him to summarize Mezzabarba's report. These details have been derived from biographical profiles of Brandolisi and from a monograph on Mezzabarba published in Paris in 1739. These works, however, make no reference to the written documentation compiled or collected by Brandolisi regarding the Chinese mission, which is preserved in the General Archive of the Piarists. This archive holds several volumes relating to the missionary history of China in the modern era. The documentation produced and collected, written in various languages, including Chinese, Latin, French, and Italian, comprises a diverse range of materials, letters, chronicles, reports, papal documents that describe the distinctive features of the evangelizing activities carried out by European missionaries in the country. This documentation does not recount Brandolisi's mission and experience in China, on which I intend to focus my paper, but also gives various sources that precede and follow the brief period during which Brandolisi lived in China, with the aim of further dilating the complex situation involving some agents and factors: the Society of Jesus, mendicant orders, Propaganda Fide, missionaries and apostolic bikers, papal legates, as well as civil and political authorities. The analysis of this documentation allow for a nuanced understanding of the historical complexity of a phenomenon with long-lasting theological, political, and cultural implications, exemplified by the tension between two distinct institutions, the padronado system and the congregation of Propaganda Fide. Only an emblematic example, a letter, a copy from the Napolitan Jesuit Domenico Fuciti, written in Tonkin in 1767 and addressed to the Cardinal Emilio Altieri, in which this missionary discussed the patronage rights of the King of Portugal in these regions and shared certain reflections on the sacrament of reconciliation. The entire documentary corpus, which also includes documents not authored by Brandolisi, was collected and bound by him into 5 larger volumes, numbered 27 to 13, according to the Registum Literarium Scientificum of the General Archive of the Order. To these 5 volumes should be added other various documents on the same subjects, which were likely gathered by Brandolisi himself or belonging to him and were studied for obvious reasons. Some of the data just shared are drawn from an article written by the historian Goffredo Cianfrocca, published in 2003, in which the scholar partially examines the documentation concerning Blandolisi mission in China. This article provides some characteristics and elements focusing almost exclusively on a few volumes on the archive, and calls upon the scholarly community to undertake a systematic study that highlights the features and dimensions of Blandolisi missionary activity, the historical political context of the time, and that publish the documentation he wrote or collected. In this regard, I intend here to analyze file number 30, which contains several documents that have been scarcely examined by experts in this field. It is catalogued as a Zibaldone, that is a collection of documents comprising letters addressed to Blandolisi by some correspondents, his own autograph letters, reports from missionaries in China, and copies of documents relating to the missionary activity and the relations established with propaganda fide. This file consists of 362 sheets divided into 23 documents and covers the period from 1705-1744. An analysis of these documents allows one to outline the main events and characteristics of Blandolisi's experience in China. Firstly, through his account and the sharing of these ideas, or his ideas, which arose from direct contact with Chinese culture and society, as well as with the missionary environment he visited, and with which he sought to establish a dialogue aimed at understanding the modes of transmission of the faith and fostering and resistance to directives issued by the Holy See regarding the compatibility between the Catholic doctrine and the traditional Chinese practices. Secondly, through correspondence with some European missionaries who regarded Blandolisi as an important point of reference, turning to him to share updates on the mission, reports practical difficulties, and seek guidance on the complex local changes. Probably the document that most clearly underlines Blandolisi's experience in China is the account of his journey and mission, written in his own in-house hand, a long book in which he recounted not only the hardships and adversities of the voyage, but also his desire to reach his destination amid his travels and the surrounding environment, but also the encounters, efforts, expectations, and difficulties that characterized his mission, alongside his determination to fulfill the task entrusted to him by Rome. In these sheets, he recorded the key stages of his itinerary, immortalized the most important episodes that defined his experience, shared his fears and successes, and conveyed his emotions, thereby offering an authentic insight into a mission lived amidst misunderstandings, discoveries, and the continual search for meaning. From this diary emerge both positive and negative aspects, situating Blandolisi within a context that was, in some respects, captivating, yet in other complex and rife with contradictions. This category also includes other diaries produced around 1722, in which he described the situation of the missionaries in China. These were written in note form, underlining some elements of his experience, observing the context in which he was embedded, noting the problems he was beginning to perceive, and expressing limiting adherence to the modus operandi adopted by the Jesuits in their catechetical work. Blandolisi's experience in China was shaped by this observation of the conduct of missionary in the country and by his listening to the priests themselves, who were called to practice the faith according to specific modes, practices, and cultural influences. This attitude, which permitted his entire experience, resulted in the formulation of opinions and reflections on the principal missionaries' issues. In other documents addressed to the Cardinale Vincenzo Petra, Blandolisi examined the work of the Jesuit missionaries in China and naturally focused on its famous rights controversy. Naturally, within these documents, two sentiments can be discerned that emerged during his experience in China. Firstly, it marked a disapproval of the missionary method employed by the Society of Jesus. Secondly, a sense of anger and perhaps resentment of the failure of the delegation led by Mezzabarba in China. Within the second field are communications received by Blandolisi from some missionaries in China, who expressed their own views and reflections on the situation of the local church, and often dwelt upon describing the modus operandi of the Jesuits, as well as the tools and the strategies they employed to implement an innovative missionary methodology and to facilitate the phenomenon of conversions. In this context, I want to analyze a specific letter that is an unpublished letter written in Beijing on the 3rd October 1733 by Teodorico Pedrini, an Italian Lazarist who arrived in Beijing in 1711. By appointment of delegate Carlo Tommasi Maillard de Tournon, Pedrini was also was also remembered a promoter of culture and a music teacher. This letter, written in a vivid personal style, first of all reveals Pedrini's affections for Blandolisi. Pedrini expressed his sadness at being unable to bid farewell to Blandolisi due to obsessive surveillance imposed by the local agents. Nevertheless, he conveyed to Blandolisi some important information regarding the Chinese mission. The sender also expressed relief and gratitude for the political shift brought about the new Chinese emperor, a figure he regarded as almost providential, having known his prior to his ascension to the throne. Pedrini reported that his persecutions had come to an end and that his persecutor has been punished. He also recounted the peculiar conduct of the Portuguese Jesuit João Mourão, who has caused harm to the Catholic mission in China. The central point of this letter is the strict criticism directed at the Society of Jesus and indirectly at the Congregation for Propaganda Fide, which was accused of allowing such abuses to proliferate. The missionary charged the ecclesiastical authority with lacking courage to remove this missionary from China, an action that was instead taken by the emperor. Indeed, the tone of this letter became polemical, almost accusatory, towards a faction within the church that protected personal and political interests at the expense of the true evangelical vocation. The relationship Pedrini established with Blandolisi is evident the entrusting of a specific task to convey the truth to the Cardinale Sacripante, so that it may finally be clear that what Pedrini had previously denounced was not a product of imagination, but the dramatic reality of the mission. Not least, the request to receive information from Rome, the desire to know how his early letters were received, and updates on various confreres reveal Pedrini's wish to re-engage in dialogue with the ecclesiastic authorities. Most likely, Pedrini's letter reveals the influence, success, and esteem that Blandolisi had earned among some missionaries during his time in China. From this letter and other documents, it is evident that Blandolisi's Chinese experience garnered him the respect of various missionaries, to the extent that he was considered a point of reference for those still engaged in the Chinese mission, an important link between China and Rome, between the missionaries and ecclesiastic authorities, so that it might contribute to clarifying some aspects, always for the triumph of Catholic doctrine and the continued establishment of its message throughout the territories of the empire. Through this letter, it is possible to confirm once again the high regard in which Blandolisi has held by European missionaries in China and by the Holy See. Finally, this dossier, number 30, there are also references of a bureaucratic nature, such as the missionaries' oath written in Latin, along pastoral matters, like, for example, the death of a Portuguese Jesuit, Miguel do Amaral, and his sanctity following certain miracles, and the report of a miracle that occurred in Shanxi in 1734. Blandolisi's experience in China was not confined to his brief stay there, nor did it conclude with his return to Europe. Rather, the numerous archival documents collected demonstrate that his mission and that mission in and for China continued through his contacts and collaboration with Propaganda Fide. This was achieved through his engagement with the Roman Curial stains and the indoctrination of Chinese neophytes and the religious rites that punctuated their faith life, through correspondence with various distinguished political and ecclesiastical authorities, through ongoing exchanges with apostolic missionaries with whom he established a dialogue grounded in mutual sharing and trust, and through the acquisition of the numerous Jesuits documents aimed at a better understanding the modus operandi of these missionaries, and delving into the peculiar characteristics of their mission, which was primarily focused on the fostering a dialogical process with Chinese society and culture via the methodology of accommodation, now commonly referred to as inculturation. In conclusion, the analysis of the missionary documentation relating to Cassio Blandolisi, a member of Mezzabarba legation sent to China to address and resolve the complex issues surrounding the Chinese rites, provides a significant testimony not only to the cultural and religious context of the period, but also to the crucial role played by this figure within the diplomatic and religious dynamics between Rome and the missions in the East Indies. A further critical investigation of the documents made possible by the much anticipated full publication of the corpus could indeed open new interpretative perspectives, contributing to a deeper understanding of the strategies employed by the Piarist, both during his brief yet significant stay in China and in the subsequent Roman period. Such an in-depth study would allow for a more nuanced reconsideration of his position, his theological and political orientation, as well as the influence he was able to exert in ecclesiastical debates and the decisions concerning the rights controversy. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Dr. Carlo Perliccia for this very interesting paper about Piarists, like an interesting case of another a member of another religious order in China. And now we will leave the discussion for after the keynote lecture by Antonella Romano. And we have a coffee break offered by the Università Suor Orsola Benincasa. So we can go to the terrazzo for having this coffee break, and then we will come back here. Thank you.
Posso un secondo? Allora, sì, sì. Grazie. Certo. E lei è specialista. Beh, rispetto a me sicuramente, guardi. No, non la sta leggendo? Allora. Forse ora ci siamo? Ah no, ora no, veramente. No, ma può essere. Esatto, lo so, però, altrimenti. Ok, ci siamo. Ok, grazie.
Siamo sicuri?
Assolutamente. Ok,
Così può staccare anche questo.
fantastico. La ringrazio allora.
dernier prêtre géorgien, je crois, en 10 ans avant la chute de Biblioteca. Ils ont réussi à rester petit enclave catholique jusqu'au retour des missionnaires.
Ok, je vois les dessins de Castel. Je pense que c'était bien. C'était bon. J'avais compris j'avais une thèse gérissionnaire. Donc, je vais tout de suite proposer, il y a 2 ans, de sur Castel. Il y avait encore des choses à faire, etc. Et oui, maintenant, j'aime pas. Comment on ne peut pas aimer un sujet comme ça? C'est le parfois qui. Donc, finalement, un projet que c'était juste. Là, c'est encore incroyable.
Ah, mais c'est incroyable. Et je crois que tu as fait des communales de fermées.
Ah là, oui, je vais là, il faut demander à Rita. Et le frère. Bon, ils ont été publiés, les dessins. Je ne sais pas si c'est tout ou l'intégralité ou pas.
Oui, tout a été publié en 1976 en Géorgie. Et toutes les traductions en géorgien de tous les
Non, mais il y a entendu aussi pas mal de publications en italien, etc. Mais je ne sais pas, oui, mais je ne sais pas si c'est ce que
non, pas tout. Il y a juste une sélection et tout a été vraiment publié en géorgien. Il y a eu une exposition en Géorgie il y a 2-3 ans, et à l'occasion, je peux faire un parce qu'il y a une couleur.
Oui, oui.
Si on ne va pas
La qualité des dessins est vraiment incroyable.
Il y a même certains qui sont dans les
tradizionale relazione terza di europea con da un momento di era per il mondiale l'Arse non la uscire così e non più un tutto del sound
Tu vedi delle cose sangue scuro dove devi fare qui
o l'arcivista
Grazie per oggi.
Però sai cosa? Mancava da controllare non è quella delle mani, c'è una che sono bravo perché fanno il congresso di se stessi, cioè hanno tipo 4-5 bracci, non c'entrano niente ma parla con l'intelligenza artificiale piuttosto. Sì,
Io mi preparo.
Questo disegno l'ho già visto.
Quale?
Il disegno questo.
Sì, perché è uno di quelli che ti vengono proposti, no? Come fondo, e a me piace tanto, devo dire, quindi lo uso spesso, però questo è per noi, per oggi, non è uno...
Ma lo so, però è che il disegno...
Sì. No, ma mi aiuta abbastanza a pensare. Ti manderò il link perché hanno registrato quando sono venuta a Roma al Quirinale, alle scuderie, sì, così.
Bambini, kids. Angelo. Sorry, kids, we have to start. The last after the lecture, we will have time for discussing. So don't worry. But I have the very big pleasure to introduce Professor Antonella Romano. Many of us know her work, and anyway, she is directrice d'études à l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales au Centre Alexandre Coiré. She is a science historian of sciences and of knowledge in the early modern age, and especially about integration processes between Europe and the world. And also she is studying about the contemporary recomposition of research about sciences. And among her great record of publication, I can remember her book Impression de Chine, l'Europe, l'englobement du monde, 2016. And she edited with Elisandretta, Romain Descendre, the book Un mondo di relazioni, Giovanni Botero e i saperi nella Roma del Cinquecento, 2021, and co-edited with Jacques Ravel, Pensée globale, 2024. Interrogation, yeah. And today she will deliver a paper, a keynote lecture about l'englobement du monde comme horizon du catholicisme romain, acteur, moyen, résultat. Please.
Thank you very much. Let me try start in English, just to announce that I will switch from English to Italian. And there is one reason for this. It's not related to my limited English, but it's a matter of politeness. I generally consider I speak in the language of the country which hosts me. And it's always a great honor to be hosted by Italian colleagues to whom I have an immense debt. So it will be an Italian conference, so don't worry. I am absolutely aware that nobody in the world today is able to understand French, and I have no problem with this very personally. I am not of these people who consider that if you don't speak French, you are simply out of the world. I think that France went out of the world, which is something a bit different. So I am absolutely convinced that French would have been limited. I trust my foreign colleagues, and I am very pleased to see here colleagues from Portugal and other countries. So, the Iberian world in front of me, and I hope that for you, Italian won't be too tough, but after 2 days of full immersion in English, maybe we deserve not Dante language, it's not my language, by the way, but some thoughts. This is my very first point of apology for those of you who are not familiar with Italian. I would invite you to learn Italian, by the way, which is a beautiful language. Second point, I'm very grateful to my colleagues who invited me, and I want to apologize not for having not been able to join the conference since the very beginning. You know that academic life is more and more invading in our lives for those of us who have academic commitments. So unfortunately, I had to be to Paris up to yesterday evening in order to distribute doctoral contracts for the new generation, which I hope this doctoral contract will help to renew a discipline who is in need of new blood for us who are old. I speak for myself only, because, I hope that those of you who are young, and I very appreciate the fact that a young generation is present here, will find at some point a stable position in an unstable world. That's the second point. So thank you very much, Massimo, because we have been discussing for a long time now together and with other colleagues in the room. I won't cite them, there are too many here. The third point is that, as you were mentioning, I am not a specialist of your topics, and you will have to be very generous with my incompetencies, with my lack of knowledge about different aspects of the beautiful conference you had. And the point was for me how to try to contribute to these very, very large questions which have been put on the floor during these 2 days, and especially this morning, and I was very grateful to listen to the 3 papers delivered by my colleagues. And what I thought could be of interest for you was simply to abuse of your time by trying to go more in depth in long-running discussion I have with many colleagues, some of them being here, some of them being not here, but having been mentioned by you, Massimo, and I thank you for this, about this question, this category of global, which is a very complex, not necessarily interesting, by the way, category, but which we are compelled to deal with because of the pressures of the global world within which we live. So the question would be, what does it mean for an historian, a specialist of the early modern period, to use or not, in which sense, how many commas, this category? And especially, I think, for those of us who have been working for many reasons and for many different reasons, I will try to elaborate a bit on this, about the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Just to put it in a very bland way, the point being, okay, it's not because you claim universalism that you are global. The point is what this means, particularly, more especially. And as I am not a specialist of the Roman Church, but maybe of Rome in the 16th century, and I will try maybe to explain why I introduce this nuance. I would like, from a perspective of history of knowledge, science and knowledge, to say something about this. So the summary which I had to write in order to the organizers to close the conference is useless, because I have been thinking a bit differently since this moment. By the way, you will see I added a last line on this title. So it's absolutely, it was not a matter of, she has forgotten what she wanted to say. I tried with the program to understand in which way I could enter this topic. This is why I added this Roman Orients in order to elaborate something in relation with you. And I'm particularly grateful to the organizer that this morning was dedicated to a piece of Orient, or to some pieces of Orient. Let's put it in this way. So let me now try to elaborate. I switch now, but unless it is too difficult for you, I stay in English. Let me know Who isn't able at all to understand Italian? No, sorry me. Okay, so if you don't mind, then I will be available for a tête-à-tête. But a very... Allora, vorrei iniziare da una riflessione che nasce all'interno in reazione a questo programma che è stato preparato dai miei colleghi. E questa riflessione è che il quadro istituzionale delle istituzioni pontificie nel quale voi state riflettendo è un quadro che non è esattamente il mio, proprio e non vorrei entrare in quello che sarebbe riflettere a Roma all'istituzione pontificia a sé stante con le sue varie subistituzioni che costruiscono il governo pontificio, nemmeno vorrei insistere più di tanto su qualcosa che sicuramente avrete già discusso in un modo molto intenso in questi 2 giorni, cioè la differenza sia cronologica che di prospettiva che il Sant'Ufficio da un lato o Propaganda Fide dall'altro lato aprono in relazioni alla problematica generale che è quella del convegno. No? E sicuramente 2 cose molto veloci su queste: le cronologie di queste 2 istituzioni sono molto diverse, il che per me è importante sottolineare proprio perché, I'm sorry, I will look at you more intensively in order to help you understanding my point. Thank you very much. Proprio perché dal momento in cui noi vogliamo utilizzare queste categorie di globo, e per il momento mi fermo a questo, come l'hai detto tu, non ho usato la parola globale nel titolo di questo vecchio libro, né l'abbiamo usato nei libri e riflessioni successivi, e ho dovuto battermi con i colleghi italiani per integrare questa parola di inglobamento all'interno di un vocabolario ricco, ma che non era quello della Crusca. Quindi abbiamo dovuto un po', e stessa cosa con i colleghi spagnoli quando abbiamo fatto la traduzione in spagnolo, englobamiento no hace parte de las palabras con las cuales se trabaja. No. And if I had to think of it in English, it would be another kind of question. Englobement is not necessarily part of the vocabulary, encompassment would be, etc., etc. So, simply to say, per dire che bisogna essere non solo consapevoli della complessità delle parole che usiamo, ma anche essere consapevoli delle temporalità con le quali si lavora. Quindi io non sono qui per negare che il mondo di oggi sia un mondo globalizzato. La cosa che invece mi preme è cercare di capire, e vorrei essere molto, molto esplicita su questa, in quanto specialista dell'Europa. No? E questo è il primo punto. Da dove parlo? Parlo da una competenza che è radicata in una conoscenza limitata, certamente, di quello che chiamiamo, per semplificare le cose, Europa, e che cercherò di definire in un modo un po' più preciso, la mia Europa essendo, diciamo, più mediterranea che del nord o dell'est, eccetera. Quindi tutto questo, no? Questa riflessione è anche legata a una temporalità molto chiara per me, che è quella del Cinquecento, 16th century. Perché? Ma non perché gli altri secoli non sono importanti. Abbiamo visto, grazie alle relazioni di stamattina, come il Settecento sia pieno di possibilità di riflettere. E quindi non sto minimamente dicendo che c'è da escludere altri secoli, bensì che c'è da essere molto radicali nell'articolazione cronologica del nostro pensiero di questi fenomeni. E infatti tutta questa mia relazione sarà, e ve lo dico subito così andiamo al punto e possiamo andare a pranzo, così si chiude la conferenza, che da quel libro, se ha un interesse, oggi per me la necessità di pensare questa categoria anche di inglobamento deve essere spaziale, come avevo cercato di farlo nel libro, accompagnata da tantissimi lavori di tantissimi colleghi. Non sto cercando di costruire ex post una mia genialità, tutto al contrario, ma dopo questi anni considero, e questo è un lavoro situato su Roma che me lo fa cercare di articolare, e sarete la cavia di questo mio tentativo di articolazione, che questa categoria non può essere solo spaziale, bensì spazio-temporale. E se noi non prendiamo in considerazione questa spazio-temporalità della categoria, allora ci perdiamo sicuramente una capacità di pensare delle cose che si conoscono forse in un modo un po' diverso. Motivo per il quale, ritornando sul vostro convegno, le due grandi istituzioni, propaganda seicentesche in poi, invece congregazione scusatemi, l'altra, Office, hanno veramente una storia diversa per quello che a me interessa cercare di evidenziare con voi oggi. Quindi questo sarebbe un primo contributo al dibattito con voi. Pensare in questi termini e cercare di aggiungere una dimensione temporale alla dimensione spaziale ci consente immediatamente a riflettere su qualcosa che è molto interessante, ma da un certo punto di vista implicito nella costruzione stessa del nostro incontro, cioè l'idea che le congregazioni sulle quali si lavora consentono di mirroring the world. Il mio punto, molto semplicemente, è che non lo mirror, they shape it. They contribute to the shaping of the geographical understanding of the world they aim at studying. Questo è il mio punto. E quindi è molto interessante cercare di vedere, di leggere la seconda parte in particolare di questo convegno in termini che i geografi usano di metageografia, metageography, in riferenza a un lavoro molto classico ormai fine anni 90, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi quando noi cerchiamo di organizzare oggi il nostro lavoro, mettendo Africa, America, East Asia, Near East, lo facciamo all'interno di una relazione a questi spazi che non è neutrale. I nostri modi di definire, quindi di mettere insieme le cose, sono performance per la nostra comprensione stessa delle cose. Ed ero per questo molto molto interessata alle relazioni di questa mattina, dove alla fine è emersa la Cina, quando si partiva di questo Near East, che è così diverso attraverso le due vostre relazioni. Quindi, prendendoti al volo, Cesare, che cosa sarebbe questo Oriental Paradigma? Che secondo me ci aiuta a capire quello che nella Roma del Cinquecento, e insisto su questo, non ho nessuna capacità oggi, ora, di andare oltre, no? Questo processo di inglobamento del mondo. Questo che cosa implica? Implica in particolare una cosa, che noi dobbiamo, a seconda da dove si arriva alla storia del Cinquecento, spostarci rispetto a dei narrative sul Cinquecento, la scoperta del nuovo mondo, eccetera, eccetera, che ci portano ad Occidente. Perché non è necessariamente così. Cioè, la riconfigurazione del mondo nel Cinquecento da parte degli europei non si può limitare a quello che è stato uno dei grandi narrative, no? Della storiografia delle scoperte, che tutto si gioca ad ovest. Proprio perché intanto il mondo è rotondo, e quindi più si va ad ovest, più alla fine si arriva ad est e si ritorna, e questo l'abbiamo non solo l'abbiamo capito attraverso i lavori dei colleghi, eccetera, ma l'abbiamo anche capito attraverso quello che per certi attori del Cinquecento era un lavoro di riconcettualizzazione del globo. Su di questo non voglio insistere, Angelo Cattaneo sa benissimo tutto quello che dobbiamo a Jean-Marc Bess per questa capacità che ormai abbiamo di avvicinarci a queste cose. La cosa che a me interessa invece qui è cercare di capire non solo, no, da un lato, non perché questa narrative della scoperta dell'Ovest, no, per fare come nei western, è stata la narrative dominante, bensì che cosa si gioca nella difficoltà nella quale siamo stati noi storici a capire l'Oriente e la costruzione dell'Oriente fatta nel Cinquecento. E ovviamente questa costruzione, e lo dico subito, dipende da dove la guardiamo, perché se la guardiamo da Lisbona, se la guardiamo da Amsterdam, se la guardiamo da Roma, è diversa. No? Quindi per questo non ci può essere una storia dell'inglobamento, e quindi se c'è una storia globale nemmeno, che non sia esplicitamente una storia situata. Da dove scrivo questa storia? Ieri come oggi, di ieri come di oggi. No? Questo secondo me è un elemento. Quindi che cosa vuol dire? E un ultimo punto molto breve. Questo Oriente, e questa è la sua dimensione ovvia per noi tutti, no? È un Oriente confuso, nel senso che non troveremo un uso di questa parola in tutte le fonti, incluse le fonti cartografiche, che ci possano dire di che cosa si tratti. Perché a seconda, no? Allora, o si aggiunge una parola per chiarificarlo. Per esempio, i portoghesi a un certo punto usano la parola Oriente Extremo, che noi poi tradurremo come Estremo Oriente, che allora estremo rispetto a un Oriente Medio, ma dov'è? Quali sono i limiti? Eccetera, eccetera, che poi ovviamente, no? E per questo insisto sull'articolazione spazio-temporale delle cose, perché a misura che si allarga questo Oriente, per gli europei, insisto, no? Si combina hanno delle cronologie di conoscenza di questo Oriente. E questo è il punto: più l'Oriente è vicino, più è noto, più l'Oriente è lontano, meno è noto. No. E quindi abbiamo bisogno di articolare questo. Che cosa vuol dire questo? Allora, e ora mi butto su Roma, proprio per cercare di dire in due o tre, attraverso 2 o 3 riflessioni da Roma, perché tutto questo è importante, o come si può lavorare, no? su questo tema che sto cercando di portare avanti, primo punto. E secondo punto, spero, per arrivare in conclusione, tra 2 ore e mezzo, avrete capito, no, scherzo, alle istituzioni del cattolicesimo post-tridentino. Ok? Quindi questa è un po' la sfida. Allora, Roma è una città. Prendiamola come città, no? Se entriamo da un punto di vista che sarebbe storia urbana. Che cos'è la Roma del Cinquecento? È una città in rovine. Che cosa vuol dire per noi? Ruins, full of ruins. Rome is only ruins. And there is a huge amount of literature from the 16th century about this point. People go to visit the ruins, to depict them, to put them into poetries, okay? But what is interesting for us, if not the fact that ruins open a window toward a historicity of the city. So it's not only a matter of landscape, it is a matter of profondità. Le rovine, se cerco di fare l'esercizio in bilingue, forse sarà un po', però cerchiamo di farlo, no? È molto interessante proprio perché la rovina non è solo un problema di suolo e quindi di rapporto contemporaneo a quello che è crollato, ma è anche il richiamo costante di un passato. Allora, nessuno all'epoca parla di 2500 anni, come sarà il caso dell'anniversario della città di Napoli che ho scoperto proprio stamattina. C'è un'elaborazione molto interessante su questa temporalità di Roma, sulla quale ci sarebbe tantissimo da dire, c'è stato tanto di scritto ovviamente, ma la cosa che a me interessa, e qui avete un esempio di questa, altro elemento assolutamente affascinante, capacità della città stessa di produrre immagini di questo, a metà Cinquecento. No? Quindi una consapevolezza che si esprime attraverso questi tantissimi dipinti o elementi. Qui ovviamente ho preso quelli che ci rinviano a Martin van Heemskerk, perché è uno dei più famosi concettualizzatori a livello pittorico di questo elemento. E la cosa che mi interessa in particolare è come le temporalità si mischiano. No, qui. E avete una temporalità greco-romana che si schiaccia con una temporalità orientale. Una temporalità orientale che sarà la temporalità, ed è quello che mi interessa qui, dell'Egitto. Quindi l'Oriente a Roma, sin dall'inizio del Cinquecento, è un Oriente incentrato per motivi storici di lunghissima durata sull'Egitto. E ne dirò 2 altre cose, e voi capite bene che la capacità stessa della città tramite la stampa a dare una corposità, una visualità a questo è assolutamente fondamentale, e mi riferisco qui all'importanza dell'impresa del Speculum Romane Magnificentiae, pubblicata dalla Frérie, studiato da Jean-Marc Bess anche e da altri colleghi, dove quello che si propone è un Atlante di immagini e ognuno, cioè è la modernità, no, del speculum, è che ognuno va dalla Frérie, fa una scelta di immagini e se ne va con il suo unicum. No? E questo è assolutamente affascinante. Quindi non voglio lavorare su questo, bensì sull'importanza di queste immagini che sono piene di Van Heemskerk, per esempio, eccetera. E se vi metto qui una rappresentazione di un palazzo aristocratico romano, non importa quale sia ora, è proprio per darvi il senso della quotidianità, no? Di questa presenza spazio-temporale di quello che era ovviamente l'impero romano, il quale, come ben sappiamo, è un impero che andò fino in Egitto. E quindi questo non è solo metabolizzato nelle immagini, è presente nella cultura visuale di Roma, come lo possiamo ritrovare attraverso non solo le immagini del Nilo che circolano attraverso il speculum, dove tra l'altro ci sono anche altre referenze all'Egitto, bensì, come sapete, sin dal primo Cinquecento, un Nilo che viene messo dove lo troviamo ancora oggi, cioè alla salita della scalinata del Campidoglio. Questo mi sembra essere un elemento sul quale noi possiamo riflettere per capire, e che poi troviamo ovviamente nelle prime collezioni pontificie di un Vaticano che si sta trasformando in museo. E ritroviamo. Quindi c'è questa presenza strutturale, visuale, che ovviamente non è solo architettonica, artistica, eccetera, ma è ovviamente elaborata all'interno di una cultura cristiana, sia veterotestamentare che neotestamentare. L'Egitto non è una novità per i cristiani. E quest'Egitto è quello che vorrei cercare di sottolineare, sperando di essere abbastanza chiara su questo. Quindi, a seconda del sistema di referenze nel quale ci si pensa, allora apre a delle temporalità che sono molto diverse. Quindi la visualità che ho commentata è la visualità dell'impero romano, ok? Dove, per ridirlo in un modo più così, dove la presenza della statuaria dell'Egitto è legata all'arrivo nei tempi imperiali di una quantità di monumenti dell'Egitto, i quali durante il Cinquecento vengono riscoperti e ora ne parlerò. E questo si coniuga con, che cosa? Ovviamente una conoscenza da cercare all'interno della cultura cristiana, sia veterotestamentare che neotestamentare, del rapporto all'Egitto, che poi si ritrova ovviamente nei dipinti con tutte le figure classiche del Nuovo Testamento, dove ci sono vengono dipinti gli episodi della fuite en Égypte, per prendere solo questo, eccetera. Allora, questo perché mi interessa in particolare? Proprio perché qui ritroviamo, proprio perché all'interno della città la necessità di integrare l'Egitto nella cultura intellettuale del mondo cristiano viene articolata all'interno di programmi che sono dei programmi pontifici. Allora, e lì vorrei cercare di mostrare molto velocemente quanto la ben nota riorganizzazione della Biblioteca Vaticana a fine Cinquecento, attraverso in particolare il programma iconografico del Salone Sistino del Papa Sisto V, è l'espressione esattamente di quello che voi state studiando. No, cioè il Salone Sistino è fondamentalmente un programma, è l'espressione di un programma politico-culturale di esplicitazione delle frontiere della cristianità. E vedete in un modo piuttosto interessante che le frontiere della cristianità nel Salone Sistino vengono declinate attraverso la pittura sui pilastri in particolare e su tutte delle figure mitiche antiche o direttamente estratte dal testo biblico che portano la diversità linguistica della quale Roma è il centro. Motivo per il quale abbiamo qui una metageografia, no? Esattamente come oggi noi ce l'abbiamo, molto interessante secondo me, che consente di capire quanto ancora a fine Cinquecento ci troviamo all'interno di una metageografia pontificia rinchiusa all'interno della dimensione cristiana della romanità, no? Dove comunque vedete che l'Egitto è solo uno di questi orizzonti orientali e che già lì avete un Oriente assolutamente multiplo e diverso, il quale viene poi lavorato, elaborato, per esempio, nelle proprie storie della Biblioteca Vaticana. Quindi non è solo che si tratta alla fine del Cinquecento di mettere l'accento su un programma culturale di descrizione, c'è un lavoro linguistico, no? Filologico, che viene a accompagnare questo programma politico. Il che, e sarà il punto sul quale mi fermerò molto velocemente, fa sì che l'Egitto, perché diventa un elemento, perché mi sono fissata sull'Egitto? Proprio perché all'interno di questa offerta linguistica dell'Oriente, no? Se lo mettiamo così, offerta linguistica dell'Oriente, l'Egitto si distacca proprio perché con la problematica delle ieroglife che si incrociano le varie prospettive di avvicinamento all'Oriente romano. Voi lo sapete, allora qui riparto sulle immagini che sono disponibili nel speculum, nelle quali vedete da un lato degli obelischi che vengono disegnati e dall'altro lato vedete degli obelischi che vengono inseriti nella città. No? Vedete queste due immagini. Allora, che cosa è la differenza tra queste due immagini, se non il fatto che alla fine del Cinquecento, esattamente quando il Salone Sistino viene aperto, viene ristrutturato, lo stesso Sisto V, al seguito di Gregorio XIII, hanno organizzato questo programma architettonico di fare riemergere gli obelischi romani che erano nel suolo. No. E questo è il programma particolarmente spettacolare che tuttora noi conosciamo dell'erezione sulla piazza San Pietro del famoso obelisco, del quale il nostro Domenico Fontana, architetto pontificio della trasformazione dell'obelisco vaticano e delle fabbriche del nostro Signore Papa Sisto V, si fa il promotore, promuovendo anche se stesso, all'interno di questo libro, il quale potremmo lavorarci, fermarci un po' di più. Non è solo un cantiere di ingegneria, come si vede qui, dove comunque ci sono 2000 lavoratori, anche ci arrivano di tutta Italia, eccetera, cioè, c'è tantissimo da dire, ma dove, e vedete qui tutta la pubblicità visiva di questo evento, il quale tra l'altro, come si vede qui, allora, è iperconcentrato sull'evento dell'erezione dell'obelisco di San Pietro, quando 4 altri obelischi vengono eretti in altri posti della città che viene riconfigurata. Quindi non è un caso, è veramente un programma nel quale si tratta, come vedete qui, le immagini sono la spettacolarità, no, del cantiere, viene ovviamente molto elaborata. La cosa che interessa a me è sottolineare il fatto che questo testo di Fontana è un testo che non è un testo di architetto solo di architetto che cerca di spiegare come ha funzionato. È un testo nel quale lui spiega questa aguglia è stata messa separatamente in stampa con tutte e 4 le facce, con le figure, eccetera, eccetera, perché i letterati presenti e assenti le possano più comodamente considerare e cavarne l'interpretazione che sino al presente sta occultata. Quindi quello che ci interessa qui è riprendere, no, questo filo dell'Oriente focalizzato sull'Egitto, che Roma ha bisogno di incorporare proprio per quello che la Chiesa sta cercando di trasformare, ma all'interno di un processo dove, no, è l'interpretazione di questa lingua è tuttora occulta. Quindi è un Oriente che sfugge, come tra l'altro lo dice l'altro grande autore che si è occupato di studiare questi obelischi, il quale il famoso Michele Mercati, archiatra pontificio studiatissimo, conosciutissimo oggi grazie a tutti i lavori di Elisa Andretta, il quale Mercati, perché un medico si occupa, anche perché Mercati è l'organizzatore del primo museo di pietre, che è la Biblioteca, che nasce all'interno del Vaticano accanto alla Biblioteca stessa. Quindi abbiamo qui un sistema di saperi che si incrociano per cercare, ed è questo che Roma offre e che mi interessa evidenziare qui, un sistema di saperi che si incrociano per cercare di non solo dare un senso nuovo a questo Oriente basato su una temporalità conosciuta, ma che continua a resistere, con questo problema degli ieroglifici, ma che diventa ancora più problematica, stavo dicendo problematicamente sconosciuta, perché questo Oriente si sta allargando allo stesso momento. E voglio solo ricordarvi due cose. La prima è che nell'85, quando emergono queste operazioni di erezione, arriva l'ambasciata giapponese, esattamente in quel momento. E quindi uno degli echi dell'arrivo dell'ambasciata giapponese la troviamo nella storia della Vaticana scritta da Panza, che continua a valorizzare questa cosa, e al contempo, come Mercati, lo vedete in questo libro sugli obelischi, lui cerca di confrontare con i mezzi nuovi che ha in Vaticana la resistenza degli ieroglifi con i libri della libreria Vaticani ritirati dagli esemplari stessi venuti dal Messico. Quindi a Roma, nello stesso spazio, troviamo un Mercati e un Fontana che cercano di fare emergere questa di fare saltare la nostra incomprensione degli ieroglifi in relazione con una offerta di nuove ragioni grafiche, per essere goodiana, di Jacques Goody, di altri orienti che stanno riconfigurando la visione geografica, ma anche spaziale, della comprensione del mondo. E solo per finire su questa necessaria romanità del processo, scusatemi, volevo ovviamente dovevo fare una citazione francese e lì ce l'avete con l'avete con Montaigne che visita la Vaticana e che scopre i libri cinesi senza capire niente. Quindi questi ieroglifi entrano da quel momento all'interno di una moltiplicazione di lingue orientali sconosciute e di sistemi di ragione grafica che sono una nuova sfida per gli intellettuali organici della Chiesa, e quello è il punto sul quale voglio concludere. Né Mercati né Fontana appartengono alle vostre congregazioni, fanno comunque assolutamente parte di queste strutture del mondo pontificio, il quale, e lo vedete qui, forse possiamo ingrandire, anche se non riesce a resistere a far leggere questi ieroglifici, comunque li inserisce all'interno di una cristianità del suo tempo dopo aver battezzato questi obelischi. L'idolatria è stata estirpata da questi obelischi che ci rimandano a delle temporalità antiche, esattamente come si sta estirpando nelle Indie orientali e occidentali di questo mondo, allora, in corso di inglobamento. Eccoci.
Grazie mille ad Antonella Romano per questa sua lettura così ricca e piena di problemi e inviti, come dire, al ragionamento, alla discussione che adesso vorrei aprire, quindi senza porre, come dire, senza frapporre indugio, soltanto con una battuta. Poco tempo fa ero con Fernando Bousa in un seminario e ha parlato di ambasciata giapponese e poi quello sguardo che tu conosci fa, se mi sente Antonella Romano dire ambasciata giapponese mi strozza, perché non era un'ambasciata, però lo dico in modo assolutamente scherzoso.
Ma fa solo piacere
parlando
ricordare il nostro
perché
Fernando.
mi sono ricordato di questa
Esatto.
battuta di Fernando. Comunque, scherzi a parte, scusate questo siparietto, io direi di aprire la discussione su tutte le relazioni, quindi inviterei anche tutti i vari relatori di oggi a venire qui. Rendo disponibile questo microfono, io mi levo magari dai piedi così, come abbiamo sempre fatto, chi vuole fare domande viene direttamente e senza strapassare il microfono
Allora, se posso, faccio la domanda anziché... No, la domanda la faccio a Antonella, la domanda. La posso fare in italiano, visto che la relazione era in italiano. Quindi. Io sono completamente d'accordo sulla necessità di una histoire située, se vogliamo usare, diciamo, il termine francese, e quindi sulla necessità di scegliere un preciso campo di indagine, in questo caso Roma, che ovviamente interessa molto anche me, e capisco anche la necessità di preservare la specificità del Cinquecento rispetto ad altri momenti. Però mi chiedo, rispetto proprio a quello di cui hai parlato oggi, quindi entro in un campo che non mi è familiare, quello dell'egittologia, diciamo così, della nascita, diciamo dell'interesse verso l'Egitto, che non è la stessa cosa. In che modo allora si può dialogare tra questo momento che tu hai ricostruito e quello successivo, parlo ovviamente del Seicento, e parlo ovviamente di una figura come Kierkegaard. Perché? Perché a me sembra, su altri campi, ma mi sembra di ritrovare quindi la stessa cosa anche qui, che il Cinquecento sia un momento di grandissime ambizioni, di nascita di ambizioni, ma anche di mezzi limitati e di consapevolezza di mezzi limitati. Cosa che nel Seicento non è più. Mi spiego. Nel Cinquecento abbiamo visto, nel tuo caso appunto, no, questa consapevolezza del fatto che i geroglifici sono una lingua ancora incognita e quindi diciamo c'è un mistero da risolvere in un qualche modo. Nel Seicento, no, Kierkegaard non si fa troppi scrupoli nell'invece proporre un'interpretazione che sappiamo essere molto lontana dalla verità, ma comunque che è salutata in una maniera come un evento, e addirittura si lancia, quando viene riscoperto l'obelisco alessandrino, no? Fa questa specie di gioco di prestigio per cui manca una delle 4 facce e lui propone, diciamo, la faccia mancante sulla base di un ragionamento di tipo matematico praticamente, cioè sulla base del fatto che assomigliava agli altri, vabbè. Però insomma c'è un'ambizione, cioè non c'è solo un'ambizione, c'è quasi una protervia, diciamo, intellettuale nel voler colmare le lacune e nel pensare di poterlo fare. Allora, è effettivamente così, e quindi c'è anche una differenza di tipo proprio di approccio cognitivo nei mezzi con cui la curia romana in senso lato e il mondo cattolico, forse più in generale, si pone rispetto agli orienti tra la fine del Cinquecento e non tanti decenni dopo la fine, voglio dire, gli anni 40 del Seicento in questo caso, perché per esempio per quanto riguarda il cristianesimo orientale, il rapporto con la cristianità orientale, il Cinquecento è un periodo di grandi semi, ma tutto arriva a maturazione molto dopo, per cui la mia temporalità, per esempio, è un po' diversa dalla tua. Questa era la domanda.
Magari raccogliamo un po' di domande prima, se poi...
Grazie Antonella per la sua relazione. Ho 3 domande, sarò molto diretto. Lei ha parlato di Mercator, Fontana, questi 2 architetti, come tanti altri agenti che hanno vissuto nella Roma del Cinquecento, fanno parte di un complesso di persone che, seguendo proposte del libro di Ayesh Rachmakandran, si possono considerare world makers, cioè intellettuali, diciamo così, che stanno pensando il mondo di una forma sempre di più universale. Lei condivide questa opinione o no? La seconda, per dire che nella congregazione del Santo Uffizio e dopo nel 600 nella propaganda fide, l'Egitto c'è, soprattutto nella propaganda fide, non tanto nel Santo Uffizio. Però ce ne sono anche altre regioni del mondo. Lei non pensa che durante il 600, durante il 500, anche a Roma, o anche Roma sia anche aperto ad altri Oriente che non solo l'Egitto? E poi la terza, per affrontare un punto che lei all'inizio ha parlato, ma che poi credo che ha lasciato durante la sua relazione. Come può un storico pensare una categoria analitica, in lo caso la categoria di inglobamento o di storia globale, se vogliamo, senza considerare la sua dimensione cronologica?
C'era Angelo Cattaneo.
Volevo un po' seguire quanto detto da Cesare, prendendo però come spunto una delle fonti che tu hai citato, Rocca, Angelo Rocca. E ci colpiva, dico ci perché abbiamo lavorato con Giulia Maggiore su questo, andando a lavorare su fonti cronologicamente, simili. Ad esempio, Angelo Rocca, quando parla delle lingue, fa questa recensione delle lingue nel testo che hai mostrato, mi colpiva. Sull'Africa si limitava solo a citare Erodoto, e sull'Oriente e sull'Asia, ad esempio, documenti che sono già presenti a stampa nelle fonti gesuitiche, i documenti, quelli che oggi chiamiamo i documenti del Giappone, stampati a Coimbra, sono lì e sono completamente ignorati. Come dire, quel passato antico in cui è centrale, o l'Egitto si sta ergendo, proprio anche con questa erezione degli obelischi, ancora non ingloba fonti che sono già presenti, per usare questo tuo inglobamento, attraverso gli archivi missionari, in particolare i gesuiti sono già lì, non riesce a inglobare, a trasformare in storia ciò che si sta già accumulando su altri orienti. Quindi uno come Rocca, che ha a disposizione la biblioteca, è lì, riesce in parte a recuperare questa dimensione di un Oriente antico, il cui centro è l'Egitto, il punto poi da dove vengono tutti gli altri saperi, ma questi altri Orienti che si stanno rivelando nelle fonti, quelli che oggi noi diciamo l'archivio, non sono lì a Roma, ma sono opachi. Soltanto, e qui vengo a Cesare, soltanto forse a partire dal 30, dal 40, si potrebbe dire anche il 50 del 600, prendono la forma di storia. Ma così. Grazie.
Io non posso parlare italiano, so I'm going to do it in English. Well, thank you so much to the 4 of you. And I think this is for you. It's very simple. There are a couple of questions that are really spark in me your presentation, and the first one is that painter, and if you know anything about these paintings, because they were quite expressive, and there was a certain sensibility that was very interesting to, like the representation of the Jesuits was something quite interesting, also like the very round images and so on. And the other one is if you find any colonial tropes in this way. I'm just thinking about Leila Slimani, who recently said, you are never stop being an immigrant. You're always like first generation immigrant, second generation immigrant. And it feels like conversion is always unachieved, like it's never quite complete. There's always like a slight sense of suspicion. Whether how many times they are baptized, they're always sort of never enough as Christians. So I want to hear your thoughts about it. And for Antonella, thank you. I think it was like very stimulating as a talk, and it really brought me to the framework of postcolonial studies and Immanuel Wallerstein idea of the sistema mondo, right? Like that spazio-temporale idea that you were referring to, and particularly in the juxtaposition of Catholicism and markets and pre-early capitalism, as it is seen on postcolonial studies. And I'm quite interested in hearing your thoughts about how this expansion of markets, to a large extent, right? Religious markets, so people who can be converted for Catholicism, which makes this opaque, I will say, in my idea, a sense of universal, when in reality it's just an expansion of markets, disguised under the claim of universality. But also the material part of that. So the more the real expansion of markets that allows the free exchange of ruins, right, from Egypt to Vatican, that brings back instruments, sometimes without even paying tariffs, if we're going there, from a very interesting exchange of goods. And the second question, I think what I really want to hear your thoughts, coming back to the idea of Sistema Mondo, it seems as, and I really like your ending, because it seems as there is an omnipresence of indies everywhere. So there are a very big paradox of the West Indies, right? Either the Indies are on the East, but now we have Eastern Indies and we have Western Indies. And there, it seems there is omnipresence, bilocation, some sort of simultaneity, like a simultaneous nature of the Indies. And here I want you to hear your thoughts about, can we talk about the need for Rome, again, as a claim as a universal Europe, as the center of the Europe, right? Trying to not only seek the margin, seek the Orient, construct the Orient, bring the Orient, consume the Orient, center it in Piazza San Pedro in order to find a definition of itself. So I really want to hear your thoughts about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of thoughts and a lot of questions. The first for Cesare. Maybe you know that I am quite fascinated by numbers. Can you give us an idea of the numbers of Oriental clergy that I know that you worked on the books with the Professiones Fides, and so maybe you can just, okay. For Elizabeth, the baptisms following the Tridentine canon give character to the soul, so it's quite complicated to give a second baptism without real very important proof that the first is in doubt. I know from my knowledge of Benedict XIV, that this was a very strong point when dealing with the Oriental churches, and only exceptionally the second baptism, in case of doubts, could be give. Why the Georgian baptism is so full of doubts from the Roman point of view? If you can just quickly give an answer. And then a question to Antonella that is more or less an observation. You worked on image and the use of art, artifacts and objects that is instrument to inglobamento of the new words. I just use this expression that is very, very general. I think that the Roman solution in the 16th century, maybe also at the end of the 15th century, was a sort of a bureaucratic solution that is very modern in all the negative sense of modernity. We have a problem and we invent a bureaucratic solution. We have the problem of the gender gap, and we invent a bureaucratic solution of this that is not at all capable to solve the problem, but we just keep it in our field and say we are working on that. And I think that the two different congregations were two different ways in first the Holy Office, then the Propaganda Fide, to find a modern bureaucratic solution to the problem of inglobamento of the word. Maybe this is my hypothesis of word. I don't know. How do you think about it?
Very quickly, trying to combine so the lecture of Antonella with the other papers that have been presented this morning. So basically, so for the three speakers of this morning, starting from Antonella observation, my question is, what is your orient? Meaning, what in your case, in the case you have presented, what is your orient? Because actually it's very important, and I'm very persuaded by Antonella's suggestions. We have to define very well which is the framework in which we are or with which we are dealing while defining orient, the point of view, and so on. And also in Cesare case, meaning so in his presentation, it was very clear this shift starting so in two different centuries, and of course depending on two different cases that are very specific with specific circumstances and so on, but probably there was also a change in the perception of the papacy toward the Orient, in the interest in Oriental rights and so on. So I'm not expert, so sorry for maybe this input are wrong. And for Antonella, so I wonder if there was also another component in the choice of Egypt as the, I don't know, the referring Orient for Roman papacy, I don't know. Are they choosing Egypt because of, I don't know, is their preferred Orient, or because Egypt was also the greatest empire before the Roman Empire and before the Roman Church? So I mean, it's a sort of genealogy, let's say. And second questions related to this one is Egypt also useful because it's mentioned in the scripture, in the Bible, for example, and you can, let's say, connect that history in a very wide sense, in this case, that history, meaning the history of the Egyptian Empire, to the history of Christianity, crossing, of course, the Roman Empire and so on. So sorry for, so I hope the questions were clear.
Are there more questions?
Innanzitutto ai ringraziamenti per questo convegno e ringrazio la collega Fiorelli perché ho sentito poco, ma veramente è stato un dono per Suor Orsola, quindi innanzitutto porto i saluti e i ringraziamenti di tutti i docenti del Dipartimento, a Vittoria e a tutti voi, però da studiosa, quindi con la giacca della studiosa, non posso esimermi, riferendomi anche ad alcune domande che sono già state fatte, da una domanda ad Antonella Romano, proprio su questo Preferred Orient, no? su questo Oriente di Egitto. Facendo la domanda mi sono occupata di Pompei, dell'immaginario pompeiano, dove sappiamo che i culti, diciamo in particolare i culti egizi, erano già molto diffusi, quindi stiamo parlando del primo secolo d.C. E c'erano già proprio dei templi, diciamo, dedicati, e quindi tutto l'immaginario pompeiano è stato poi improntato anche a questa romanità, naturalmente contaminata in qualche modo dal pericolo dei culti orientali, ma che erano egiziani, diciamo. Allora mi chiedo quanto questo Egitto del Cinquecento non sia in realtà l'Egitto romano, cioè il classicismo del Cinquecento, cioè di una romanità che era egiziana e che in fin dei conti raccoglie la grecità che era già alessandrina, perché l'incontro con Acaia c'è stato con l'Acaia dell'alessandrinismo, quindi che esercitava un dominio, per strizzare l'occhio, diciamo, anche all'altro intervento della collega che parlava di colonialismo culturale, che era di Alessandria d'Egitto, dell'alessandrinismo, che quindi recepisce Roma, e dunque quindi mi chiedo quanto non sia una scelta cinquecentesca, quanto invece non sia una fedeltà ancora una volta, diciamo, a quel classicismo romano dentro cui già c'era molto, diciamo, l'Egitto. Grazie.
More questions? Volevo inserirmi soltanto con before. Penso che a proposito di Orienti e della conoscenza degli Orienti non dobbiamo dimenticare la Terra Santa, che è, diciamo, la Terra Santa, intendo i luoghi santi, scusate, che sono l'Oriente per eccellenza, per antonomasia, e sono presenti ovviamente nell'arte, nella storia dell'arte, e sin da quando nasce la custodia negli anni 30 del Trecento, la custodia francescana diventa un punto di riferimento, a mio modesto avviso, fondamentale. Senza poi, come dire, fare altre domande sulla lettura che hanno proposto i vari colleghi, e poi da ultimo le interessantissime per me osservazioni di Antonella Romano. Io penso che appunto la questione del reshaping e soprattutto del posizionamento geografico e cronologico di chi scrive, degli attori, sia fondamentale, e in questo senso si vede molto, sto occupando di frati mendicanti che dall'America o dall'Asia arrivano in Europa, non gesuiti rigorosamente, portando memoriali, testi, eccetera, che sono stati letti tradizionalmente anche da studiosi amici come Giovanni Pizzorusso e molti altri, come informatori di propaganda fide, costruendo quindi una sorta di genealogia, no? Per cui se venivano erano in quanto informatori e quello che portavano erano informazioni propaganda fide, ma nella realtà invece erano persone che venivano da contesti, chiamiamole indie occidentali, indie orientali, l'Africa, la Persia, eccetera, per questioni che riguardavano i territori da cui venivano, e portavano questi testi non solo a Roma, li portavano a Lisbona e a Madrid. E il famoso Diego Cogliado, con cui ci dilettiamo Carlo Pelliccia e io, è uno che fa la spola dalle Filippine a Madrid, torna nelle Filippine, viene a Roma, il Giappone, cioè sono, come dire, forme di trasmissione, di costruzione del sapere, delle immagini, tutto, insomma, adesso non voglio le cose le sapete voi meglio di me, che non possiamo ridurre a no? Da fuori, tra virgolette, dagli orienti o dagli occidenti arrivano informazioni a Roma, perché le cose penso siano decisamente più complesse. Scusate questo mio sproloquio, now direi che ognuno di voi, everyone, can...
Dici tu, diamo l'ordine.
Passa lei il microfono.
Well, and thank you very much to everybody for the very inspiring questions, comments. I'm not sure I have been able to take note of all the questions, but I'll try, and please at some point just tell me what I may have forgotten. Just maybe let me start with an element which could be an answer to Angelo. When we have been working on Giovanni Botero e le relazioni universali in this collective volume, one of the very interesting element of the investigation was exactly related to what you mentioned. The point is not that you have or not the possibility to access informations. The point is how, why it concretely works. And what you mentioned about your own investigation, we had to take it into account with Botero. We were exactly interested in this question. What does it mean that somebody who is who he is in terms of being central into the many pontifical institutions, being based in Rome, because it was one of the central elements of the investigation. He writes the Relazioni Universali, being based in Rome. So the starting point of the investigation was, okay, the resources are there. How does he use them? What does it make that you use them or not? And this is a way for us to make history, just not to give for granted that because you have repositories of artifacts, of information, of whatever you want, they are part of what Botero doing his work of englobement of the world is doing. Okay, so I have no answer to this. I fully agree with the fact that it's not because some elements, datas, informations, artifacts are somewhere in the same city that they become immediately part of our way of the actors' way of understanding the process in which they are. This would be a first element of answer, which maybe allows me to answer directly one of the third question you raised, and muito obrigada for the question. For me, there are two distinct categories, the emic and the ethic categories. Okay, so englobement, global, etc., are not actors' categories. Okay, they are ours. Why should we use them? Simply, I didn't invent the idea that the mondialization of the world started in the 16th century, but as a specialist of the 16th century, I have to take a position with this and maybe to try to understand it in a different way as it has been proposed, as something, you know, which was there. I am more interested, and this is why the category of englobement interests me, because it is processual. It gives a sense of the actors' complex relations among them as part of institutions, with institutions, etc., etc. And this is why I would never just say, okay, this is global history. And this is a problem I may have with this general category as world makers. I appreciate a lot the book you mentioned, as I appreciate all the books and papers I put in my footnotes. And I still fight for us when we publish to have a huge amount of space to quote the huge amount of works which have been done, which of course becomes more and more problematic when you publish in the Anglophone world, where having only 2 lines, you can't simply pay a tribute to the huge amount of work which has been done, is done. So the problem for me with Fontana, for instance, I don't know if he was considering himself as a world maker. So maybe it is emic. Is it an emic or ethic category? Fontana was the architect of the Pope, which means, of course, a relevant position, which he had to embody, but also to justify. And there is always a tension between these 2 positions. And what interests me is not the idea of qualifying as a world maker or not, is just to try to turn to the mixed epistemologies through which we need to read the kind of book he publishes, because we can't simply put them into a category as architecture or linguistic, admitted, this would be irrelevant, or Orientalism. Or we are faced, at least me with my incompetencies, with, and the same for Mercati. Okay, he's a physician, but he's also a naturalist, but he's also a librarian. But, you know, these multi-faced activities, which are expressed at some point in publications when they publish, but which are also embodied in the different social spaces where they circulate. And this is why the idea of situated history is so important, because the matter is not to turn to the books in order to read them out of the rich, complex, tricky, still unknown social milieu or milieus, no, different milieus within which these people are circulating. And of course, in the footnotes, you have to put this density. This density which we may be willing to do. And this is one of the reasons why Cesare's presentation was very, very interesting. It was based on 2 cases. So you go in depth and you try just to understand. So this would be a way to answer. And of course, just excuse me if I was ambiguous or not clear with this. My point is not to say that the Roman 16th century is mono-oriented toward Egypt. If I had to make the conference, but I won't do it, don't worry. The point would be to say not only this Orient is expanding, starting at the beginning of the 16th century up to the end of the 16th century, because of the processes which are taken in charge by these new institutions. And I fully agree with your hypothesis. Okay, so there is this multiplication, demultiplication of Orients. So yes, absolutely. Interest, and the Egyptian Orient is not the same at the beginning of the 16th century as it will be at the end of the 16th century. So thank you very much for your question, because maybe it allows me to make clear a point which is very important for me, this space-time combination of this. You see, and I think it is absolutely, absolutely crucial. So, difference between the 16th and the 17th century. The 17th century follows the 16th century, you know, basic non-postmodern at all statement up to now, okay? I won't make Einstein revelation about temporality in history. Now, sorry for the joke. What does it mean? It means that I am not sure that taken individually, each of these people of the 16th century were shaping a project. Institutions have projections. People refer to the institutions, are part of them, an impulse, depending on where they are in the institution. So, and the same for the 17th century. So I think that each period of the history of the papal institution and of papacies have been in the necessity to articulate a program. Did they success in the realization of their program or not? To some extent, I don't care. It's not my problem. It would be the problem of the church, but not mine, to some extent. This is a first element of answer. And of course, the Catholic Church of the 17th century is dealing in a completely different context, also because of a very different relation to the Iberian empires, which I have not been very loquacious about, but the Iberian empires make that what I am trying to discuss here could have been possible. So there is not for me, but thank you very much for your point. I think it was very important. Anyway, all of your questions simply allow me to be a bit more rigorous. This question of universalism of the Catholic Church wouldn't turn into an englobement program without the empires. There is very little to comment about this. For me, it's maybe the starting point at my age. I mean, you are much younger than me. So I don't feel post-colonial in saying this. I feel that it is the facts with which we do work now with these institutions. Maybe we may be quiet, or not quiet, but cool with this. That's it, okay? The Iberian empires are the machine through which this has been implemented. And the articulation between the projects of these empires, which are very different, the cultural projects of universalization of the church, are a constant renegotiation, which is to be approached through the different scales at which this has been developed. And here again, I turn to your two presentations this morning. To look at this through individuals is also a way to avoid any kind of generalization and yes, substantification of I don't know what. And I think that working with scales is also something which for me is a bit a starting point, or makes part of the way in which we play. Okay, but there would be much more to say. I'm sorry, I tried just to be, because I want. Okay, Kierkegaard. Ma do palle con Kierkegaard. Sorry, you won't have to put it on the. What the point? I won't translate into into English. The point is that, as you know, I have been working also a long time ago, and I'm still very interested in Kierkegaard. One of the questions with him is, and for me it still is an open question, what Kierkegaard is representative of? And this would be a first question, which we as historians have to raise. And of course, to some extent, you know, the Jesuit who knows everything. What does it mean that Kierkegaard is a Jesuit? I do not know, sincerely. What my way of no, I won't sing, don't worry. My way of trying to think of him is a bit more in this sense. Who is he? Which agenda? Where? Except to do what? To promote what in relation with the various institutions he has been part, and in relation, of course, with which legacies he has been working with. And of course, there is a 16th century legacy, and consciousness of limited, of failure, of impossibility, etc. You know, to some extent, I would be tempted to say Botero has said everything in the Relazioni Universali. He was very clear about the fact that Christianity was not anymore the most important religious power in the world. So, who took this Botero's claim seriously? How was it? But we can, of course, discuss. I have no doubt about this, and it is a bit caricatural what I say, but this is the way in which. But why I stick to the 16th, and I maybe will stop there, not because I want to defend a period. First of all, because you can't have extensive competencies. And this is one of my problems with global historians. No, you can't work with everything, but it was not a criticism. There is a problem. We have to be serious at some point about what we are able to manage at a thick level. This would be and also because I didn't insist enough on this, but the sense of the globe changed in the 16th century. And to some extent, this change has been incorporated epistemologically, culturally, politically by the different actors. And this is my only, and of course, this is completely Eurocentric as a perspective. I have no problem with this. And then, this is my only point. So, but Kierkegaard, yes. Then there were other absolutely fascinating questions, but I don't want to take the floor. Although I have been paid to be here, so and as I was unable to attend but I don't think you are expecting me to give 3 conferences because of the short time. So there are many other questions which are absolutely fascinating. Yes, okay. Simultaneous nature of indies, absolutely, yes, absolutely. And this is what one of the Jesuits says, our indies are here. He was speaking about Naples and Sicily. So yes, simultaneous natures of Indies. Indies is a way to coin something like the otherness, a word I do not like because it is too loaded in terms of post-Orientalist perspective, etc., etc. No doubt with this. And yes, the idea that at some point an architectural geste to put the center of the world in a symbolic, erotic way, also, if you want, with this erection of an obelisk which has been baptized is, yes, a strong move. We could add that 30 years later, El Bernini replaced this centrality with the monumental. So, you know, each, and this is also a way to think about these reappropriations of the past periods, etc. And about this absolutely fascinating question about this classical Egypt, which Egypt is rediscovered by the this end of the 16th century move toward obelisks. I think you're right, but not only, because and here there is to push a bit more the analysis. This is not only a matter of the classical Egypt. We know very well that parts of this esoteric Egypt has been incorporated by the Roman Empire. So the Catholic Church has also to deal with this. But absolutely clearly, Egypt, and you're absolutely right, the temporality of Egypt is the longest temporality which could be embedded into the Christian temporality without putting in danger the Christian temporality. It will be the Chinese temporality, which a few decades later will just make this a serious issue. But of course, Geographia Sacra, Historia Sacra, this is also a center which is reappropriated, which is transferred, translated, moved to Rome, I think. And of course, it's a powerful attempt. I'm not sure that it worked, but this is another question. Thank you very much.
So since we are running out of time, I will be very, very brief. Speaking of figures, up to some years ago, a few years ago actually, there was a common assumption that 1,000 Eastern Christians might have circulated across the whole of early modern Europe, not just Rome or Italy. And then I started looking at this source. So within the archives of the Holy Office, there are these registers of professions of faith, Catholic faith, which were demanded on Eastern Christians passing through Rome for different reasons in order to be lodged or to file some petitions to the Curia. And I soon discovered that just for Rome and just for the period 1650, 1800, there were like more than 3,000 just for them, so just in Rome. And to this, we can add all the people listed in other sources, like the diaries of some hospices and hostels in Rome. So actually, a lot of them. Speaking of clergy, I might say that there were not so many of them contemporary, but 40, 50 among priests, bishops, even patriarchs or monks at the same time in Rome in the 18th century, at least, perhaps less more in the 17th century. Anyway, they were interesting figures because they were sometimes the link between Rome and what was going on in the Ottoman Empire or elsewhere. So I'm building a prosopographical database of Eastern Christians coming to Rome and just passing sometimes to Rome. So they end up elsewhere in Europe, especially in Catholic Europe, obviously, because Rome was also the occasion to obtain some papers, some documents in order to go elsewhere. And so, yeah, I'm hoping to complete it in a short time. And to answer the question, what is my Orient? It's a good question. My Orient is an artificial construct. It's an ideology. It's the Oriens Catholicus, Catholic Orient, something which does not exist in reality. It exists in the mind of the Roman Curia. It's an artificial category because it is made of something which at the time did not yet exist. So the Eastern Catholic churches which were in the making. It is artificial because it puts together very different things, very different rites, languages, communities scattered through the Mediterranean and sometimes even beyond. But it's interesting because of that also. So I can assume that this is the point of view of Rome. But as I have written also elsewhere, and I think this resonates well with what you were saying before, the word is also a construction, and a construction which is made in Rome. So yeah, from my point of view, I'm interested in this Orient which is made up in Rome, which has its own specific chronology, its own specific features, and I'm trying to make sense of it.
No, nothing to add.
Thank you very much for all your questions. So on the question regarding the painter, so Cristoforo Castelli is his name. So he's a Palermitan, he's Theatin. He's quite known because he left seven different volumes. It's interesting because he is usually studied for himself, but we have to keep in mind that he is part of one mission and that his job was two parts of his job. First, regarding the Georgia, because a Georgian king asked for a painter. He asked for several artists, and one of his precious question was a painter. So it's why he was chosen. And he's there also to help establish a mission, to be legitimate regarding the king question, and also to establish part of European art there, because he have quite influence on the making of icons in Georgia. And for Rome, it's very important because he's there to illustrate the mission. And when we look at his volumes, we see that it's bound by him to explain Georgia through illustration. So really, he wants to explain the mission and to give in Rome this Oriental vision of Georgian Christianity with the specification of Georgia. So for the question regarding the colonial vision and the conversion of Georgia, we don't have really this question in Georgia because for Georgian, they are the real Christians. Rome is very interesting, but it's foreign and they're real descendant of Christianity. They have their convent in Athos, Sinai, and Jerusalem. They have lots of houses in Jerusalem. So for them, they're really part of Christianity. And the missionary are good because they come from Rome and they give like legitimacy to the Georgian Christian land surrounded by all these Muslims. They really need to be linked to Europe and so to Rome to exist. And we have the other face of the same piece is that the missionary really want to accommodate to the Georgian Christianity. They ask to be able to follow the Georgian calendar. They want also to, they have this question of the, how to say, all the day you're not allowed to eat a lot of things. I don't know the word in English, sorry. So they really want to follow the Georgian way of doing things. And even some of them ask to be allowed to celebrate in Georgian language. So, on the character, the question of second baptism. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I think what's interesting is that we have no real answer that the baptism is not valid, because if there was such an answer, it will be like a condemnation of all the baptism. I think the missionary really want to say to Rome, be careful, because the Georgian baptism is not always valid because of this separation of matter and form, main question. Second question is that because they don't want to have so many apostates, they don't baptize all the children. There is this non-official, everyone is supposed to be baptized, but some of the times we don't have even the ceremony. It just, you're Georgian, so I'm sure you're baptized. I think it's why in Georgia they baptize again, because as a matter of fact, they are not baptized. And also, I think the missionary wants the Roman Church to know that there is this question of ignorance of the priests, and because they are for them it's very important to instruct the Georgian Church and Georgian priests to how the things are done in Rome. They want to accommodate to a certain limit to the Georgian Christianity, but they really are very strict on these matters of sacraments. And so for my Arians, it's a bit like Cesare, the construction of the artificial Oriental, Catholic Orient. But I think maybe because of the Georgian case, my Orient is a little bit in opposition of the Georgian, they see the center of the Christianity in Constantinople. So for them, we are Occident and they're more in the center than us. So it's a bit. Thank
you. Now I ask to Professor Fiorelli and Professor Alcalac to come here, please. And we are closing. I just want to. Sorry, I don't want to threaten anybody. I just want to say to the colleagues of Mirroring the World to send me by the end of September the title, the abstract of your contribution, and the short biography for preparing the book proposal that I will send to Palgrave. And with the idea to give the book and to give me the text, the final text by June 2026. So please remember this point for the refund of the just a moment. Okay. For the journey, the travel expenses, you have please to send all avion tickets, only travel expenses, avion tickets, bus tickets, and so on, in digital copy to the boarding passes to Maria Teresa Fattori. And then we send them, all the colleagues. everyone who...
There's only one.
Okay. Bene. Adesso diamo la parola ai
I only want to say, to thank you everybody for coming in Naples and in University Suor Benincasa. We have the directress of the Department of Humanities that already told us. I only want to thank everybody and thank everybody that have been working with us for these years on the project, because this appointment is a very interesting moment, scientific moment, but it is even the end of a long work that has been very hard for the younger that have worked with us. So thank you very much, really.
And I associate myself today to the thanks, the warmest thanks to all of you for having attended, for your contribution in books, articles, lectures, and so on. And thanks again to Suor Orsola Benincasa for having hosted all the speakers and the activity. Happy birthday again to to Vittoria, and thanks, and a final applause for all of you.
Io soltanto ringrazio, lo dico in italiano perché ringrazio davvero i giovani che hanno lavorato con noi, dottorandi, assegnisti, soprattutto ovviamente ringrazio l'Università di Studi Suor Orsola Benincasa per questa magnifica accoglienza e ringrazio davvero tanto sia Vittoria Fiorelli che Matteo Alcalac, compagni di avventure, e quindi grazie davvero per quello che avete fatto.